In modern Japan, the protagonists suddenly found themselves deep in a forest, staring in disbelief because something like this actually existed. As one of the main protagonists, Amada Shiru clocked the whole situation, then told you who he was, because he just moved into his grandmother's house, and when he opened the altar room, he found a hidden passage to another world, and honestly, it didn't feel real. At first, he figured it was just a weird glitch in reality or a straight-up hallucination, especially after he just walked away from that brutally stressful job. When he yanked open the closet, a whole new world spilled out behind the doors, and his mind immediately snapped back to his grandmother's mysterious vanishing from 7 years ago, especially since it was finally confirmed last month. The protagonist suddenly flashed back to his childhood, back when he'd pepper his grandmother with questions about her secret, and she'd always grin and tell him it wasn't really that big of a secret at all. She kept the truth locked away and only promised she'd spill it when he got older so he'd snap and complain, baffled and furious that she wouldn't just tell him. Then the worst happened. His grandmother died without ever revealing a thing, and all he had left was the image of her holding the double peace pose. While he sat there stuck on her mysterious secrets, he suddenly noticed a hidden letter tucked right in front of her portrait. His curiosity went wild. Was it her will? He had no clue his grandmother was a real magician. She'd crossed worlds to Japan from Ruffatio 80 years ago, and that letter just dropped 6 absolutely crucial points. First, it revealed that the closet was a secret doorway to Ruffatio, and once you stepped in, the whole realm was packed with magic skills and peculiar powers. And yeah, Ruffatio wasn't safe. Monsters prowled in the shadows. Plus, it wasn't just humans out there, different races lived side by side. Then the letter hits you with the real twist. Inside the envelope was a ring made to let the protagonist finally understand Ruffatio's language. And the last instruction: wear the ring, then dig into the book hidden behind the altar. The letter promised that the truth would click into place the moment he got there, so he tried to breathe through the panic. But when the information hit him all at once, the protagonist burst out that it was too much to deal with. Then while he hunted around the altar, he stumbled on a ring and 2 books, only to find he couldn't make heads or tails of the language they were written in. Out of nowhere, it hit him. To where was the missing key to cracking what the ring's book was saying, and when he finally finished the task, the meaning clicked in his head, even catching him off guard. Yeah, he could read the language thanks to the ring, but the contents still left him uneasy. Then a voice boomed that he'd unlocked a skill called asterisk equivalent exchange asterisk asterisk. That voice hit him like a punch. His mind scrambled, trying to figure out who it was. Then he finally accepted the truth. He just unlocked a real new skill, straight from the kind of light novels and video games he always dreamed about. He also snagged the skill inventory, and every time a new skill unlocked, he blurted it out like he couldn't believe it. Now that the book was finished, he paced and wondered what to do next. Should he risk jumping into another world and unleash his new powers? He heard his grandmother's words echo in his head, asterisk, you'll get it when you reach another world asterisk. And it only made him more confused because she always pushed him to go out and explore, yet the night was already dragging on, and tomorrow he still had to hit the home center to grab everything he needed. Staring at his grandmother's portrait, he finally made. He chose to head straight there, and once he stepped into that other world, his wild adventure began. He realized the town wasn't so bad after all. Then the walking finally caught up to him and his stomach growled for food. Right as he strolled past a meat shop, a guy popped up and offered him a skewer at a steal. So curious, he leaned in and asked, "Okay, what meat is this?" The shopkeeper leaned in and swore it was rabbit meat, then told him he could take it for a mere 3 bronze coins. He reached out for the payment but realized he was broke in that exact moment, so he blurted out an apology. The shopkeeper just nodded and said, basically, "You only came for the meat." And even though the skewer smelled unreal, he swallowed his craving and kept moving. Later, he plunged a hand into his pocket and hit something solid, $4, 200 in Japanese yen, the same change he'd grabbed from a convenience store earlier. Then his eyes widened, because he wanted to use those yen to pay for the skewer, only for the money to instantly morph into bronze coins right before his face. He couldn't even process what was happening to him. Driven by pure determination, he stormed back into the skewer shop, flashed his bronze coins at the shopkeeper and demanded, "Is this what you meant?" The shopkeeper swore that this was the exact same coin type he'd teased earlier, and that's when it hit the protagonist. He had the power of equivalent exchange. Snapping back to reality, he asked the shopkeeper for 3 skewers and the man hit him with 8 bronze coins, saying the trip wasn't exactly short. Still, the protagonist bowed his thanks, grateful for the kindness. Since it was his first bite in this new world, he expected magic, until the skewer hit his mouth and tasted like pure plain nothing, no seasoning at all. While he was mulling over his equal exchange, he couldn't help thinking, could he swap those coins back into Japanese yen? Just when he thought it was over, he commanded the coins to transform, and they snapped back into the old currency for real. So with the equivalent exchange, he could swap currency between the two worlds, meaning if he raked in cash over there, Japan would suddenly spit out the same wealth for him. The protagonist's jaw dropped at what this skill could do, and he couldn't help himself. He decided to push it even harder with a full $10,000. He couldn't believe it, the dollars had turned into real-looking silver coins like they were minted from pure silver. So he rushed back to the same meat shopkeeper and asked to pay with one. The shopkeeper shot back, asking if he'd finally run out of bronze coins because they didn't have enough change for silver. Then it hit him, one bronze coin was worth $100 but a silver coin. That thing was worth a whopping $10,000 in Japanese yen. Right now, the main character is sitting on 2 silver coins and 34 bronze coins. Then the big question hits. They start wondering if they can even pay with $1, $50 and $1 bills, since that country's lowest currency is the bronze coin. The main character blurted out that the shopkeeper's shocked reaction basically screamed one thing: our cash is more than enough to roam this whole town. Right as they decided to go exploring, they tripped into a buzzing marketplace, and they couldn't wait to chat with everyone, especially this girl rocking cat ears. As everyone's eyes snapped to the main character, people immediately started whispering like, should we grab them new clothes? Because the outfit they wore looked completely out of place in this world. As they headed for the clothing shop, a young girl darted up holding a bucket of flowers and asked if they wanted to buy some. He froze in shock when he spotted a kid hawking flowers and blurted, "How much are these?" And the little girl smiled and said they'd cost 3 bronze coins. The main character asked if 2 bronze coins would cover it, and she snapped back that it'd be fine with just one, if the price was steep. Then the main character leaned in and asked to buy the yellow one, sliding 3 bronze coins into her hands. Shame burned in the young girl's face as she blurted, "Is it too expensive?" And the main character smiled, telling her it was totally okay since it was exactly what they wanted. Even so, she pushed for him to hand it over first, and afterward he planned to dig into how that world worked. She nodded and went along with it, so he kicked things off by asking her name. Then she lit up and shouted that her name was Aina. Then he stepped forward, introduced himself as Shiro, and couldn't hide how thrilled he was to finally meet her. She frowned, then he asked the name of the town she lived in. Confusion flashed across her face, but he didn't back down. He swore he was just a traveler. At last, she spilled the town's name, and he immediately thanked her because it turned out to be Ninatic, a district inside Gil's kingdom. In Ninatic, money came in 3 tiers. 100 bronze coins stacked up to 1 silver, and 100 silvers crushed into 1 gold. The place paid out an average of 8 silver coins a month, and it was so tight-lipped that only a handful of people even dared to own gold coins. Even Aina, young as she was, had to set up business deals with the local government, every required arrangement handled right before she could move. Suddenly, he spun back to her and demanded 10 more flowers right then, and she froze, wondering if he was even serious, but he insisted he was, since 1 single flower just wouldn't cut it for decorating. With the 30 copper coins placed in his hands, she shot him a grateful smile and thanked him. Then he figured his grandmother would love the gesture, until he remembered Aina was still right there. To wipe out her doubts, he brushed it off as nothing, thanked her for the gorgeous flowers, and Aina lit up, screaming with joy that he'd actually appreciated them. Then the protagonist leaned in and demanded directions to the government office. Aina smiled and stepped in to take him there. Now let's jump back into the story. Ine guided the protagonist straight to the government office and announced they'd arrived. Then he hesitated, asking if a foreigner like him could really walk in, and Ine just smiled and said, "Don't worry, everyone here is genuinely kind." Then the protagonist slipped into the building and a grandmother greeted him, staring with an unsettling look that made his gut tighten. She asked if he'd come from another country and he nodded, confirming it. After that, she made him write down his name during business hours and spell out exactly how he'd sell his goods, then told him he had 3 choices: become a hawker and pay 20 bronze coins a day, which she said was $1,000 in Japanese dollars. A peddler option with the same price, or a shipowner who'd charge 3 silver coins a day, about $30,000. She told him he could pick any one of the three and test it for 10 days. With that ring letting him understand any language, the protagonist chose option 2 for the next 5 days, starting tomorrow, and when he handed over the contract, the old lady raised an eyebrow at his weird name. He just shrugged, thinking $1,000 a day was a steal since he could even set up a flea market shop near Tokyo for about $3,000. He loved how cheap everything seemed in that world until the shock hit him. He had no clue what the real market prices were. The lady told her that the mayor had set the prices for everyone in town so it stayed affordable, and she sent him off with good wishes. Then he shot back his thanks as the whole deal wrapped up in just about 15 minutes, completely stunned at how smoothly it all went. Afterward, he told Aina he was heading back to the market and thanked her again for her help. Right as he headed to the market, she burst out shouting that he'd taken the wrong turn, and then she grabbed the lead and guided him the right way. At the market, she leaned in and pressed him. Had he finally decided what he'd sell tomorrow? At first, he started worrying about his merchandise, then caught himself. He hadn't even thought it through yet and he was still on the fence. She fired back that he could sell supplies to adventurers since the town was crawling with them. She scanned the market and realized nearly everyone was dressed like they were about to raid a dungeon. Then it hit him, those monsters in the forest were the reason, and somehow he'd clawed his way out alive, lucky as hell. Turning back to Aina, she nodded and said selling to adventurers was the move. Then she admitted her flowers had been selling terribly until now. Kairat swept up a bunch of flowers from her and she lit up like a sunrise, so later that day she couldn't stop smiling as she told him how amazing it felt to finally meet him. She even said he had his face burning red, and I guess that made him agree fast. Ine offered to show him the market and he jumped at it. She led him through the lantern and flint shop, the cape and sleeping bag stall, the knife and whetstone place, and so many more. The protagonist blurted out, stunned at the massive pile of adventurers' gear being sold everywhere. Ine even dragged him to the preserve food shop, and the protagonist couldn't help thinking, man, she's such a great kid, she'd make an amazing wife someday. She kept dragging him from shop to shop, pointing out lantern oil, rich stew, and everything else for their next step. While deep down, the protagonist's dream burned hot, a beautiful wife and a daughter, and he wanted them soon. Staring off like he was deep in a storm of thoughts, Ine finally asked if he'd decided what he wanted to sell from the shops she'd shown him. Then he leaned in and whispered something straight into her ear. The very next day, he had to get his goods ready to sell. Then Anya suddenly popped in, smiling and greeting him with a bright, good morning. He asked if she'd be selling flowers that day, and she grinned, saying yes, because she'd dragged herself up early to harvest them. The protagonist stared at the gorgeous flowers and promised Aina they'd sell a ton that day, and Aina lit up, saying she'd use the money to buy medicine for her mother. As they pushed on to sell their goods, Aina got hit with one brutal problem after another. She couldn't get those flowers to move. The protagonist pumped her up, gripping her confidence tight, telling her she'd land the sale for sure. Meanwhile, an adventurer stepped up to the protagonist and grilled him on what he was trying to sell. The adventurer stared at the box like, wait, did someone make this out of paper? Then the protagonist cut in fast, snapping, nope. Inside are tiny bits of wood matches that can spark a real flame. The adventurer froze, confessing he'd never heard of matches before, and demanded, how can something so small turn into fire? The protagonist slammed the wood onto the surface with a sharp strike, and just like that, it burst into flames. The young adventurer froze, stunned by what he was seeing. While the protagonist kept teaching the adventurers how to strike those matches, one stunned adventurer blurted, how on earth could you pull off something like that? Baffled by the chaos, the protagonist demanded why everyone suddenly acted like they'd never seen it before. Then he offered to show it one more time, and the whole crowd went silent in shock. They couldn't believe their eyes. He just slammed a stick onto the paper and fire erupted, and one stunned onlooker had to ask if it was some kind of magic gadget because they'd never seen anything like it before. The protagonist heard every last one of them out, then asked who was brave enough to try, assuring them it was simple and anyone could handle it. When one person finally stepped up, and just like the protagonist hoped, everything snapped into place. While he was roaming the market, he realized this city had never even heard of matches. No one had ever seen one spark. So yesterday, he bolted back to his own world and loaded up on matches just to bring proof back with him. While he was mapping out his plan, a dusty old man in the crowd erupted, claiming he'd lived past 250 years and still never laid eyes on anything like this. Then the adventurer nodded right along, calling it an absolutely mind-blowing creation. He said flint and steel still did the trick, but it dragged on forever just to get a single spark, and lugging around those heavy magic tools everywhere was a nightmare too, yet the real pain was that the party had 0 witches, so they were stuck wasting ages trying to make fire. The protagonist kicked off a bold new venture everyone backed, then he proudly declared, "From here on out, we're done wasting our time and money on those nasty, overpriced auctions." He promised they'd feel free and electrified, and all of it hinged on his invention of matches. He pushed the crowd to grab one each and everyone nodded along. Then an adventurer burst forward, eager to know the price of a match, completely hooked by how insanely incredible it was made. Finally, the protagonist snapped the question everyone was dying to ask, and the crowd immediately erupted into wild guesses, convinced it had to cost a fortune. One guy swore it was about 80 bronze coins, calling it a reasonable price, and the protagonist's brain instantly did the math. One bronze coin equaled $100, $75 British pence, or 95 American cents. He had 2 ways to move those matches: jack up the price and sell them like a luxury item, or slash the cost and make the profit back by selling like crazy. With this first method, every transaction raked in more cash, but the price climbed fast enough that fewer people could keep up and the pool of buyers shrank. The second plan was nothing like the first, where anyone could buy the product, but that choice crushed the profit per item, so he had to pick just one way to go. So he sprinted back to the gatherers and declared loud and clear that every box held 40 matches. To celebrate the shop's grand opening, they tossed it to him for a whopping special price, just 5 bronze coins. Everyone cheered at the price and rushed to place their orders, and the protagonist warned them, "Push these matches near water or humidity and they'll fail, so stay sharp." That day he walked away with over 100 matches sold. Just as his shop was completely sold out, an old man shuffled up and asked for matches. He apologized and told him, "We're out," but swore he'd give him a crew number for tomorrow. The old man blinked, confused about what a crew number even meant, so the protagonist explained it calmly, then shut the store for good. He blurted to himself that if this kept up, tomorrow would draw even more people in. Later, when he finally stepped outside, a wall of clouds had swallowed the sky and he started worrying, could he really juggle everything by himself tomorrow? Still, once he calmed down, he told them everything would be fine, and he made it clear he didn't need any flowers tomorrow. On his way home, he spotted Aina getting crushed by the sidewalk, selling flowers and shouting to every passerby that they were cheap and gorgeous, yet not a single person even paused to buy. She suddenly locked eyes on the protagonist and grilled him about how his day was going. Then he told her he'd sold every last match, so he shut down his shop early. Ine blurted that it was unbelievable, then he asked her about her own flowers. With teary eyes, she admitted her flowers weren't moving and asked why nobody was buying them, and the protagonist immediately stepped in, worried something was wrong with her. She waved away his worry and declared she'd keep selling flowers no matter what. Right as she was about to walk out, he snatched her hands and begged her to wait. He leaned in and asked her to give him her attention for just a moment. He pitched the idea that she should help him at his shop the very next day, and she couldn't help but ask, "Are you sure you're okay with me assisting you?" The main character snapped that she shouldn't act like that, begging for her help because she was Aina, then promised she'd get paid too, and she burst out in shock. She pleaded to get a job in his shop, then swore there was no universe where she wouldn't make it in. On that note, the main character thanked her and she waved it off, saying he didn't need to thank her since she was terrible at selling. Not a single one of her flowers moved, she admitted. That's why she had to thank him, because he handed her that work and changed everything. He blurted to himself that he'd heard Aina thank people with such humble warmth 100 times, and it hit him so hard he thanked her in his own head, then told her he'd have to throw himself at his store full force tomorrow because his heart was shaking with emotion, and he swore he'd work like hell. As everything unfolded, the main character burst out to Aina that he'd be waiting for her the very next morning. She just nodded along. Then he darted back to the portal spot because he refused to get caught. Scouting for any watchers, he slipped through the door and roared, "Open sesame," unlocking his world with a single chant. Turns out the portal was wired straight into his closet. He could call it up anywhere with just a thought, and he was praying nobody would start firing off those suggestive jokes. Either way, it was time to go home. The The moment he slammed into his room, he blurted out in disbelief that he'd stacked up a whole pile of silver and copper coins. With his equivalent exchange power, he turned those coins into Japanese dollars. He couldn't believe the profit he pulled in from running his store for just 1 hour, so much it was almost the same as the dead-end job he used to hate. He blurts out that if things keep going like this, maybe he really could make it as a merchant for the rest of his life, so he shuts down his idle fantasies and throws himself into prepping for tomorrow at the store. He had to race back to the exact spot where he'd last seen the matches stored. Then boom, he spotted them and his jaw dropped. Those matches were windproof and waterproof, something he didn't even know existed, like he must have been totally blind for missing them earlier. After snagging those matches, he blurted out that he'd rake in a massive profit selling them to adventurers, certain his stash would be plenty. Then the shopkeeper's eyes nearly bugged out seeing him buy an absurd pile, wondering what kind of troublemaker he was serving. Once the man paid, a new thought hit him hard. How on earth would he carry all those matches home safely? The only idea that surfaced was whether he could lean on his spatial storage skill, equivalent exchange, to pull it off. To his shock, he actually cracked open a pocket dimension with that skill. He crammed every match into his bag so he could carry them all with ease. His back was wrecked from his old job, and there was no way that same beat-up bag could have survived this many matches. Suddenly, a glowing info bar flashed in front of his eyes, showing him he could now read every detail of the items stored in his pocket dimension, and the power was getting scary strong. It even made him wonder how his grandmother ever pulled off something like this. With these new abilities, he never had to lug a single thing again, and deep down, it felt completely unnatural. So he used the moment to its fullest. He sold matches at the market for the next 4 days, and once that was done, he'd finally be free to choose his next move. With his insane power surging inside him, he was 100% sure he'd strike it rich and become ridiculously wealthy. Suddenly, a girl caught him muttering to himself, panicked, and ran to tell her mother right away. Then her mother snapped that she shouldn't accuse strangers because she had no idea what they'd been through. So the protagonist swallowed it, went silent, and sprinted home to get ready for the next day. The next day, Iena slipped into a bath and her mom wished her a great day, then asked why she wasn't bringing her flowers. Iena just shook her head no and said that today she'd be helping the protagonist run his store. Meanwhile, the protagonist was finally set. He stared at his grandmother's portrait and begged her to give him luck before he stepped out. Then he yanked open the closet door and dove right in. As he finally slipped to the other side of the closet, Aina was right there, staring at him. He froze, then greeted her, and she answered with a bright, "Good morning." He asked if he'd kept her waiting, and she laughed off his worry. She'd only just arrived a moment ago. Curious, the protagonist pressed her for the truth, and she finally admitted she'd waited a bit, plus she told him the customers were already there, and he couldn't believe how many were waiting when he walked in. Aina snapped that they had to give it everything today, but the main character cut in fast, telling her to hold up, because he needed a moment to get everything set. Suddenly, the girl blurted that the crowd had swollen so huge they were even choking the other shops on the street. And that spelled disaster for him, because once you've been a corporate slave, you know trouble when you see it. Then, right out of nowhere, a man popped up and started praising the main character for drawing a crowd like that. The moment he clocked the truth, shock hit him hard. The guy in front of him wasn't some stranger at all, he was the meat shop's own shopkeeper. The shopkeeper spilled that rumors about the match item had been floating around, and he couldn't believe the main character had been right there the whole time. When the man asked what went wrong since the main character looked swamped by customers, the main character snapped back that it wasn't anything else. The crowd was the problem. The shopkeeper's companion pitched an idea. She said they could set up their own stall on the town's edge and offered to let him use it for free so he wouldn't have to crowd or bother the other vendors. She fired back that she was positive, told him not to worry, this was their day off, and he thanked her with genuine gratitude. He whipped around toward the meat shop owner and demanded, "Is she your wife?" But she shook her head and said, "No, she's my sister." Next, they all stormed over to the woman's shop to kick things off. The protagonist blurted it again, "If I say S, let the small one through. If I say B, let the big one through." And then reminded Aina not to lose track of the survival matches they'd agreed on. She nodded, telling him to hand it all to her while he worried about her nerves and asked if she was okay. He even shot his customers an apology for the wait and then officially threw his shop open. He ordered everyone with priority tickets to surge to the front. Then he snapped at Aina to grab 3 small items and 2 big ones. After that, he demanded 5 more small items and 1 more big item, and Aina hurried over, apologizing for the delay. And he demanded she hurry and bring him 4 survival matches. Aina stared in disbelief as the matches vanished from the shelves in a flash. Step by step, the protagonist handled every single customer, and Aina just stood there with her jaw dropped at how lightning fast the sales were happening, like this was the secret thrill of trading and she couldn't believe it. Suddenly, the main character blurted out that they sold out again, every last bit. Anna shot back, "Are you serious?" And he nodded, confirming they truly wiped the whole stock clean. Then they thanked Anna for all her help. They also thanked the shop owner and their sister who helped without a single complaint. Then when the protagonist counted the profits, they literally couldn't believe what they'd earned. Yesterday, they actually thought they'd pull in $200,000 every hour. Then after selling matches for 3 non-stop hours, they crushed it and pocketed about $1.5 million. Pulled in nearly $490,000 every hour, so they couldn't help wondering if this is what millionaires really make, and they hauled ass before anyone got any wild ideas. They couldn't risk using their pocket dimension in front of everyone, so they ditched the idea. Then the protagonist headed back to reality and handed Aina payment for her hard work. And he urged her to grab something beautiful for herself, and something nice for her mom too. Aina thanked him, saying she should be the one thanking him for giving her the chance to work. Then the protagonist shook his head and told her there was no need for more thanks because it was Aina who truly helped him. But Anna still pushed through and made sure she expressed her gratitude. Suddenly, her stomach let out a loud growl and it hit her. They'd skipped a break all day, so why not grab a quick bite right now? He slid her some food and she squinted, asking if it was bread. Then he grinned and told her, "No, it's a sandwich." And the shock hit hard. It was her first time ever seeing white bread like that. She took one bite, froze for a second, then burst out that it tasted incredible. Right then the protagonist beamed, relieved she loved the sandwich. While they were both deep into their meal, another girl suddenly slid in and asked for a quick minute with him. She told him she'd heard there were new matches being sold in town and she just assumed he was the seller, so he admitted, yes, then immediately apologized because he'd run out for the day. But she didn't want distance, she wanted to see him. She popped right in and introduced herself as Karen, the mayor of the whole town. The protagonist nearly choked when he realized the mayor wasn't just young, she was straight up stunning. He'd pictured the mayor as a man with real clout, someone whose authority made people fall in line. Shaking off those thoughts, he demanded to know what Karen wanted from him, and she answered with heartfelt gratitude, thanking him sincerely for a merchant of his caliber setting foot in her town. He barged in mid-sentence and demanded he be the one to thank her for letting him do business there, and when she shot back that his self-esteem was in the gutter, because most merchants in that town were stubborn, he froze and asked, "Is that really true?" She blurted out at him, demanding to know if he'd help her. She told them the town sat out in the middle of nowhere where every merchant dragged themselves like they were hauling a curse, and the only essentials the place needed were priced through the roof. Then she snapped that their stuff couldn't possibly sell at normal rates because they were cutting prices, yet their money still wouldn't budge. The whole situation was a mess that demanded action. She told him straight up she wanted to smash through that mess in town, and they'd need a market to make it happen. Then she thrust a key into his hand and said it was the key to her house. She froze at his reaction, then shot back that everything was fine, until Aina suddenly blurted that the mayor wanted to move in with him. He took her in like that was exactly what the mayor demanded, then asked her to marry him. He completely stunned the protagonist, who immediately turned and demanded, "What do you mean?" The mayor snapped into action and straight up clarified it was all just a misunderstanding. She stressed she was single, absolutely not hunting for a marriage candidate, and that this whole thing wasn't even close to what she wanted. She snapped the conversation back to the point, then leaned in and said she needed to ask a favor. She told him there was an empty house just nearby, handed him the key, and said that starting tomorrow he could run his business out of the shop on the first floor. Curious, the protagonist pressed for answers and she snapped back that the day before she'd gotten complaints from other merchants, because people were packed shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the market and nobody could sell a thing. The mayor leaned in and asked whether he'd spotted the same problem. He nodded hard, admitting it was nearly impossible to keep business running like that. The mayor swept him in with a grin, offered to personally show him around, and told him to judge for himself whether the place felt right. When they finally reached the empty building, the protagonist froze, clueless on what to do next. Then the place hit him as if it were unreal, and the mayor leaned in, telling him she only hoped he'd love it. Ine leaned in close to the protagonist and whispered in his ear, telling him there was one more thing the mayor wanted to ask, like whether he had a lover. He blurted out that he didn't have a girlfriend without even thinking, and before he could breathe, the mayor snapped that it wasn't what she was trying to ask. She pressed him straight to the point. Why would a big-shot, successful merchant like him ever risk his trade in a tiny little town? She'd only managed to pull in around 500 people, and that was a brutal thing for a mayor to admit. Yet she shot back that he could earn way more in other towns and cities, and the protagonist instantly nodded along like, she's right. But he genuinely loved the place, so much so he told me he'd only been in Ninrich for 3 days. But Ina, his own worker, poured her heart into it, and the mayor even treated him kindly, even though he wasn't from around there. It felt like he'd fallen headfirst in love with the whole town. The hero got dropped into this world from somewhere else and barely knew a thing about other towns, but he was dead sure no other place would feel this warm. The mayor thanked him for pouring out his love for her town, and the protagonist watched her emotions flicker across her face. He suddenly realized he'd made that girl's eyes fill with tears. Later, the mayor shot her hand out and told him to reach for her, and right then the protagonist grinned and pitched, "Call me Sheru." After the introductions finally wrapped up, the protagonist signed a 1-month contract for a shop at the town hall, and just like that, he kicked off his business on the spot. 5 days later, the protagonist finally swallowed their pride and admitted, sadly, that the matches were all gone for the day. Still, he swore he'd sold enough matches to cover the town's needs, so it made zero sense that they kept flying off the shelves anyway. Right then, Ine popped in and told him she'd finished cleaning, so he shot back a good night, pointed her to the second floor, and told her to get some rest. She tried to offer more help, but he waved her off, insisting everything was totally fine. After a while, he shouted for Aina, but she never showed up. He figured she'd fallen asleep, because she was only 8 years old. When he finally reached her, she jolted awake and he rushed to ask if he'd woken her. She snapped that it was Daddy's fault she was still asleep, claiming she'd been mumbling in her sleep. She begged him to lift her, and in a total mix-up she thought he was her dad. Dad pulled him close, and the second he was tucked in, he sagged off and fell asleep in her arms. Then she tucked her in, slipped the covers tight, and whispered like a vow that she, too, wasn't just a kid anymore, he was a father now. It was day 4 of the store's non-stop sales, and the main character finally decided Aina needed a break, so he strode up to the customers and announced, "We're sold out." Working alone felt brutal. Then the mayor suddenly showed up, called Shuru by name, and the gratitude hit her like a wave. She told him clear as day, if he said yes to her offer, the guild would roll into the capital soon. They'd have to decide on the spot whether to set up a whole new branch there. She dragged the main character in front of everyone who'd come from the capital and asked him to show off his matches. He didn't mind, but he couldn't figure out why it mattered. Then the mayor admitted she'd never seen anything like it, not even back in the capital or anywhere else in the city. Curiosity sparked in her eyes as she demanded to know where on earth he got those things. Watching the main character hesitate, she leaned in and said she was ready to pry into it, because if he really was the only one who could pull this off, the inspectors would definitely want to know. The main character said he got exactly what she meant. She just wanted him to use the matches to lure the inspector in, so the inspector would swear the talent's items had that rare, special charm no one else had, and boom, it would all work. The protagonist blurted, "I'll come up with something shocking too, something that'll impress her after the matches." The mayor flashed him a thankful smile and promised, with full confidence, that he'd repay him someday. The very next afternoon, the matches sold out again, every last one vanished. Aga, fresh back at work, cornered the protagonist and asked what had him so bothered. He admitted he was plotting something to hook the inspector's interest. Suddenly, he blurted out that he'd decided to drop by Karen's place for a while. When he finally reached her place, he blurted out that the matches were sold out again, only to watch the mayor slap him on the back and call him a skilled merchant, totally different from what the protagonist had in mind. Then the real shock hit him. Why were they selling 5 times the matches compared to the town's population? The mayor dropped a wild rumor that someone resold the matches in another town, and it crushed it so hard. Once the word hit the streets, everyone started copying the scheme. So maybe they should slap a cap on how many matches people can buy, and she told him she'd come to his store right now to ask him for a major favor. They hauled themselves upstairs in the office to hash it out before he even had a chance to ask her about that request. She leaned in and asked if he knew about the Adventurers Guild in town. He shot back, "It's called Silver Moon," and the mayor didn't even realize he just guessed it right. The mayor leaned in and told him the guild was packed with adventurers as loyal customers, and that the guild itself served as the middleman. He took orders from clients and handed them straight to adventurers, part of a job-crunching organization that paid up for every win, sending them to guard people and livestock from monster raids, or to hunt down herbs and mushrooms needed for medicine. The mayor warned that if they'd known sooner, they'd have to move fast, and then she hit them with the truth. Silver Moon was the only adventurers guild in town. The moment she brought up the guildmaster of Silver Moon, the protagonist froze, because that name didn't just sound important, it meant the head of the Adventurers Guild, and that title lit up every teenage boy's imagination. Then the protagonist snapped, "What's wrong with Gilmas?" Karen burst out that he'd bolted the night before because he was broke and couldn't keep the guild running. The guild's adventurers were gearing up to bail on town too, because with no guild management money to back them up, their hands were tied and the whole situation was a nightmare. Still, she dug in and swore she had a plan. The Adventurers Guild in the capital was pushing to open a brand new branch right in their town. She'd been turning down the offer so she could look out for Silver Moon, but with everything spiraling, she started seriously weighing whether to finally say yes. Then the protagonist cut in and warned that they were seconds from losing a vital asset, so yeah, accepting it was the only smart move. Just as the scene kicked off, the mayor strode up to the protagonist and grilled him hard. Was he really sure he wanted to team up with the adventurers for their quests? He told them that this was the only way he could truly see what adventurers needed to survive. She demanded to know if he understood the risks, because back then the Eastern Forest was the only place adventurers could go. The protagonist insisted he had it all figured out, but his real plan was simple: get adventurers to scour that place for herbs and minerals. She swore it would make things far less dangerous, then admitted with zero sugarcoating that she still wanted to pull him into an adventure and that her relationship with Silver Moon was downright awful. Last night, the Silver Moon substitute guildmaster stormed into town like they owned the place. He showed up and demanded she front them some money. It was a simple request, so the other protagonist blurted, "How much do we need?" And she held up both hands like a clue, flashing a total of 10. He asked if it would cost 10 copper and she shot it down. Then he tried 10 silver and she refused again, but the moment he blinked, she offered 10 gold and the mayor snapped, "Hush, you're too loud." She broke it down. In a tiny town like theirs, there wasn't even close to that kind of money floating around. Maybe a tenth she could have thought about, but a full 10 gold coins, forget it. And when she refused, the main character shot back that asking for help after shutting them down would be nearly impossible. The mayor gave a sharp nod and promised she'd send the letter, but she made it clear the main character shouldn't expect a thing back. Then the main character charged straight to the Silver Moon Adventurers Guild in the eastern side of town. It was their first time stepping into a guild, and nerves were hitting them hard. The moment he stepped into the guild, the other adventurers turned toward him and welcomed him with cheers. One of them blurted out that a new member just joined and demanded where the seniors' welcome party was, and the main character snapped back that he wasn't some rookie adventurer at all, he was a merchant. The adventurer finally cracked and admitted it was their blunder, saying they mixed the situation up and treated them like an animal cabatin, then added they should have priced that punch because one hit could crush stone. All at once, a voice cut through the air from out of nowhere, and the protagonist snapped into motion, chasing it, hunting the source. He clocked her sitting there and told her he'd come straight on a referral from the mayor. He leaned in and tried to start a conversation, telling her he only needed a little bit of her time. Startled, she jolted awake and immediately demanded how long he'd been standing there. She realized she was wearing the uniform and panic hit like lightning, rage surged, and the girl blurted out why he was touching her, even demanding to know if he was into her. With one single word, she crowned herself the Silver Moon poster girl and bragged that she could summon 1,000 hulking men on command. The protagonist shot back that nobody else was even there, like it was the most obvious thing, and yeah, it sounded pretty rude. She flashed a confident grin and said sometimes others show up too, but she alone would be enough to crush him so hard she could even bring down stone, and that's when the protagonist realized this girl was trouble waiting to explode. He cut the small talk and demanded where the substitute guildmaster was hiding, then ordered her to call them right then and there for him. She admitted she could summon the substitute, then slammed the twist. She wasn't calling one at all, she was the substitute guildmaster. They picked Emil because the reason to name her substitute guildmaster of Guild Silver Moon was simple, and everyone knew it. Next day after the guildmaster bolted, another young girl disappeared too, and nobody knew why. She was convinced those jerks were sneaking around behind everyone's back. Then she didn't realize he was already caught because she knew everything and she'd practically seen them making out all over the place. By the time it was over, they were rattling off all kinds of noise inside the guildmaster's room, hoping bandits would burst in, strip them, smash them up, and then sell them off to some slave merchant for a pathetic 5 copper or whatever. Right then, she blurted that the guildmaster smelled like a horny goblin, and the protagonist cut in to remind her she'd done her best. Then he asked if she was finished venting yet. She practically gushed about how sweet he was to let her rant for a full 5 hours, and then she started unbuttoning her shirt, leaving him to snap, "Why are you doing that?" The girl demanded to know why he was there, and he thrust a letter from the mayor into her hands. Then the mayor's name hit the air. She snapped with rage and spat that she was a stupid big-breast mayor, and even with that furious glare he couldn't help but wonder if Grandma's ring was glitching. He told her flat out, "I don't know who you mean," then pointed and clarified, "I'm talking about the mayor of Monarch Karen." She snapped back that all the brain food must have gone to her chest then, because Karen is pure cruelty. She tore the protagonist's letter to shreds. She was dead set against affairs and adultery. She found them utterly disgusting. Then came Akin, pure trouble, who ditched Silver Moon and opened the door to a rival adventurer guild, proving she had zero loyalty and all the worst instincts. She wouldn't cough up even 10 measly coins, even after the protagonist insisted it was a legit fortune, basically 10 gold coins. Karen had her own worries, so she cut him off on the spot and demanded to know, was he really got feelings for her, or was he just overdoing it to get under her skin? She also admitted she was still living with her, convinced they were still best friends. She snapped that she'd never insult people, especially her closest friends, just because they didn't have much money. The guild was in deep trouble, and she had zero idea what to do next. Then the protagonist spilled the truth. He had proof about her link to the mayor, and demanded she drop the whole thing about the letter. He also let slip that he'd landed a commission for the Silver Moon Adventurers Guild. She leaned in and asked, "Tell me, how can I help you?" He thought she wanted to tag along with an adventurer, so he figured she'd just make it an escort request, but she told him that wasn't really something anyone had done before. He asked if it was hard to pull off, and she said she could only think of one qualified person. It was a top-tier party of 4 elite members, and the price tag was brutally expensive. She said the party had a name like a lightning bolt, Azure Flash. After that meeting with the substitute guildmaster, he snapped back to his store, flipped the sign to closed, and called it a night. Ine shot him a look and asked if he was really shutting down, and he grinned, saying he figured it'd be about 3 days because he wanted to play pretend adventurer for a bit. Ine had her own dreams to chase, so when all of that finally lined up, relief hit her hard. She asked what he wanted to do, and he brushed it off like none of it mattered. Then they parted ways for good. At the Silver Moon Adventurers Guild, he slammed his knuckles on the door. The substitute guildmaster showed up, waved him inside, and casually admitted she'd been waiting just for him. She leaned in and promised she'd never bite him, or even think about doing anything like that. Then almost instantly, they shoved him right into Silver Moon's proud inner circle. A silver-ranked party rallied to ride with him on his mission, hunting down high-class herbs with him. Right when she was on the verge of telling him the truth about their leader, he popped out of nowhere and blurted that it had been ages since he last saw the protagonist, yet the protagonist couldn't for the life of him remember where he'd met this leader before. Then it all slammed into him. This so-called leader was the very first customer who'd ever bought matches from him, and the guy even introduced himself as a liar while promising to bring the rest of the party to him, one by one. He lined everyone up and introduced them all, even their priest Rolf, who couldn't stop smiling when he met Shiro, and declared that they'd work together perfectly. The leader grabbed the protagonist by the nerves and warned him, "Don't you dare poke the war priest," because that guy went around swinging his mace like it was nothing. Then they finally had their magician, Neska. She barely ever talked, but the moment she cast a spell you could tell she was deadly good. Still, her chanting dragged its feet, so the magician snapped, smacked the leader on the head with her stick and growled for him to mind his own business. The leader snapped that he'd do it if she chanted even faster, then she shrugged and said she'd think about it right as the leader was about to introduce the next member. She shot forward, cut the moment short, and introduced herself, Keela. When he finally saw her, joy hit. Because she had cat ears, he instantly wondered if she was from the cat race, but his reaction made her blink in shock, saying there are plenty of awful people out there who hate the cat race. Between the commissioners, the hero snapped, "Who in their right mind could hate cat ears? Those are adorable." The girl went bright red, but the leader brushed it off and introduced her as the ranger, then bragged that she hunts down traps. She couldn't help herself, she grinned and said she fights too, with a dagger in one hand and a bow in the other. The moment he laid eyes on her, his jaw dropped. She grinned and told him he hadn't seen anything yet. The leader sneered that her specialty was escaping, and the protagonist snapped back that he had no right to talk like that right after their quick meet. The main character erupted in a shout, telling everyone to get out right now. Then the leader leaned in and demanded, "Are you really ready for this?" And the main character shot back, "Yeah, we're going." But after everything, they finally set their sights on the eastern forest. Aina barreled up to the laboratory door, knocked once and stepped inside, only to find a man already waiting there for her. As the chaos erupted, a brand new journey slammed into motion. Warrior Monk Rolf, Wizard Neska, and Ranger Keela stepped forward to begin their next quest. And the warrior Liar, while the main character secretly prayed the group would dodge every last bit of danger. The leader told everyone to drop their guard, stay calm, and dodge monsters at every chance. Sure, they existed, but hunting them was no cakewalk. Then the cat girl burst in and swore she'd already stumbled onto a heap of herbs. The priest shot back that they didn't need just any stash. They wanted the fancy, high-class kind, the ones that would make the guild's request finally count, but getting them was going to be brutal. The magician nodded along with the priest, and Liar suddenly snapped, "It's getting dark fast." Once Liar clocked what was going on, he called for everyone to stop for the day, and the leader immediately snapped back. Did they really have enough room to rest their bodies like the old rule demanded? He blurted to himself that he wanted the same words from his old boss. Then, out of nowhere, the leader barked, "Set up the camp." But he also came to terms with it. Those matches were seriously awesome. With everyone gushing their gratitude, Shiru bowed and thanked them for all the praise, but the leader couldn't resist needling him, smirking, "So you're really planning to cash in and sell these in the royal capital, huh?" The priest flat out admitted that if that infamous merchant gang in the capital caught wind of it, he'd be in serious trouble. Then Liar jumped in, saying the priest was never wrong. The magician girl snapped at the liar that her stomach was growling and she'd been walking all day, so the leader immediately called everyone over and told them to get something to eat. Kairat told himself that even adventurers who spent most days living off the wild still survived on nothing fancier than dried meat and tough-looking bread. Kella noticed Shiro drifting in his thoughts and asked if he'd eaten. Then she offered him a chunk of raw fish, and Shiro shook his head and refused it outright. Then he admitted he'd brought some, and moments later he ripped open the bag and dumped every single ready-to-eat food can out in front of everyone. Watching everyone's faces twist with confusion as he pulled out those state-of-the-art containers like he was about to drop a bomb. The leader insisted it couldn't be the food, then leaned in and challenged Shiro to eat the whole thing by himself. Shiro didn't back down. He said there was plenty for everyone and revealed those weren't leftovers at all. They were brand new items for his store, the kind he wanted everyone to try so he could hear their feedback. When the protagonist blurted out that it was a food sampling party, everyone erupted in pure joy. After the leader took a bite, his eyes widened and he demanded what kind of food this was. Kella stepped in, swore they were insanely tasty, and even the priest admitted he couldn't resist the same temptation. That surprise food sampling party wrapped up fast. Every single one of the four of them chimed in with glowing praise. Kella blurted that she couldn't stop smiling because she was stuffed now, and the magician laughed and said she'd remember just how delicious that chocolate tasted, while the priest nodded like it was straight-up God's plan. That night, Liar spotted the protagonist alone, urged him to shut his eyes and get some rest, because the watch still had to be handled. The protagonist shot back that he'd never been the type to hit the sack this early, and when the leader suggested they start talking, the protagonist burst out that adventurers didn't sleep in sleeping bags. The liar leaned in and swore that winter's ice was so brutal they'd freeze to death with only one blanket, and if they grabbed more, they'd just end up piling on extra luggage. The liar blurted a wish that he had his own spatial storage skill, and that stunned the protagonist because he had no idea the liar even knew about it. Then the liar pressed him, asking straight out if he was a merchant because merchants would know too. He claimed the skill was worth somewhere between 1,000 and 100,000. They also teased that some dungeons and ancient civilizations hid a spatial storage skill book, and the protagonist ended up holding that very book in his hands. He dragged the book over and demanded, "So what's it worth?" But the liar just stared, baffled, because the guy was a merchant too and still didn't get why he'd ask. Then the liar finally guessed the thing could haul the weight of a horse cart and might even be enough to snag one of those no-balls mansions. The liar blurted that it was probably so valuable he couldn't even finish it in a lifetime, and the protagonist muttered to himself that he was sure glad he'd kept it hidden, because later he'd find out just how much it could really hold. Then he told the liar he was finally getting sleepy, and the leader promised, "Don't worry, I'll wake you up in the morning." Out of nowhere he shot to his feet, fists clenched, ready to throw down. He sprang up and slammed into everyone to wake them, then grabbed Shiro and demanded, "Can you wake Neska too?" Chilling presence closed the distance. When the protagonist had to wake Neska, he rushed to her side and begged her to snap out of the chocolate dream, because it felt like an emergency was blazing right at the door. Then he leaned in and grilled Keela, asking if she knew anything about it. Then she told him it was hopeless, this thing was coming from downwind and she couldn't catch a single scent at all. Right then, the priest snapped, "This isn't just any monster, it might be brutally smart." Commander snapped at Neska to speed up and get her magic ready right now. Suddenly it hit them, of all things a grizzly was right there. The leader blurted that something was closing in fast and then hammered home the cruel truth. As silver-ranked adventurers, there was no way they could beat it. Panic surged through him, he wanted to bolt right there but he couldn't. The priest snapped that Kella, since she was the only catch race member in their group, could slip away and escape. Keela shouted she wouldn't abandon any of them, but their leader cut her off, swearing that even if they battled, victory was a dead end. And that's when everyone froze because nobody knew what came next until the priest snapped, saying someone had to be the bait for the auctions that were closing in. Everyone kept asking who's the best pick. Option A, the protagonist himself. Option B, Shiro, who'd only just met Azure Flash today. Option C, him, the one adventurer who was basically a stranger. And the shocking truth? It was the protagonist all along, no matter how hard they tried to think it through. Right on cue, the leader strode in and called for Kairat, just like the protagonist had been expecting, and when Kairat saw those ghost-pale faces, a sick certainty hit him. The message wasn't anything good, it was death. Like clockwork, the protagonist figured Liar would spin it as if he'd been made the bait so everyone else could stay safe. But just when he thought he'd be stuck, Liar caught him off guard. She told him to run away with Kella and Neska and promised that Ralph and him would hold the monster off. This whole thing left Kairat totally baffled, so the leader stepped in and told him straight he and Ralph were longtime friends, meaning there was nothing to fear at all. But Neska refused to flee. She snapped that she'd fight too, while Liar hissed that she was a burden who'd slow them down, and still Liar fought back, insisting he wanted to at least look cool in front of the woman he loved. In the end, he told Ralph to ready the healing magic and to pray he wouldn't get one-shotted. Ralph nodded, then got the order to bolt the second he burned everything he had. Keela snapped a warning to Liar, because another monster was creeping up behind him. And they both froze because turns out there weren't one, there were two of them. Ralph snapped that Keela and Neska should get ready to sprint while he and Lair slammed themselves into the monster's path, only for Neska to gasp, "We're going to die." So the protagonist clung to his grandma's advice, never quit no matter how hopeless things got. With that said, he charged straight at the monsters with fearless courage, shocking everyone, and when the fight erupted, he burned them down with fire. Then he snapped his focus to the next monster, declaring it was officially its turn to feel the heat. The protagonist realized two monsters were tearing through the battlefield at the same time, but he and his crew, right alongside the other adventurers, refused to back down. The leader froze in confusion when he saw the protagonist fighting instead of sprinting like he'd been told. He waved him over and snapped, "Why aren't you following my orders?" But the protagonist just brushed him off and ignored him. He decided to toss a firecracker first to pull the monster's attention, then slip away before anyone could catch him. So when his companions grilled him about it, he grinned and swore that Grizzly would regret ever coming near him. And he lit firecrackers to torment the Grizzly even more. Out of nowhere, the leader barked that someone was creeping up behind him, right as the grizzly bear was moments from ripping into them. Jer snapped around and unleashed a shot straight into its face, forcing it to recoil backward. The protagonist lit up and said it was insanely effective, then asked the big question: was that a critical hit? The leader froze, confused, and demanded to know if Shiro pulled out magic or some other trick. Shiro smirked and said it was just a tool packed with poisonous mist, then he swung it up and sprayed it on the spot. Liar was still totally baffled, couldn't wrap his head around it, but he shoved his doubts aside and yelled at everyone to sprint, because the mist was already messing with their eyes and noses. He told them that adventurers couldn't afford to miss this chance, and Keela snapped to it, snatching a bag of huge nails, itching to go after the monster for revenge. They put in the grind, fought like hell, and still managed to take the creature down. Liar blurted that they just had to take it apart now, but Nesca groaned that it was a pain in the neck. Then the protagonist pushed Liar to think again and admitted he liked Nesca. Right then, Nesca's cheeks went red, and Liar instantly felt that same awkward heat too. He snapped that he had zero clue what the protagonist was even talking about. Shiro blurted out what he'd told her before about the girl he loved, then got cut off fast. Leader snapped at him to focus on butchering the bear, and even the grisly parts weren't just scraps. They were all worth something. Solar ordered him to rip off the hide while Nesca yanked out the blood and stuffed it into a leather bag, freezing it with magic. And Kella got told to handle the fangs as the whole high-class dismantling went full swing now that the skin was gone. Then the claws hit next, and right out of nowhere Keela blurts, "So what do I do with its balls?" leaving everyone utterly stunned. The boss leaned in and said the testicles had medicinal value, then demanded they cut them off too, and later Liar finally admitted they couldn't handle anything beyond that. He also pressed the protagonist to pause the quest and head back to town. He pushed to sell the bear's materials before they spoiled, swearing they were far more valuable than any fancy herb, and then he even claimed half of that guy's cup was his too, so the protagonist snapped back, asking if that was asking for too much. The leader snapped back, "Yes," and it hit hard. Turns out they'd been wiped out because they didn't have that one thing of his, so we grilled them next about what it was worth. The main character stepped in, smiled gently at the liar and told him not to worry, because he truly believed human life is priceless. Suddenly, Kella burst in, looked Shiro right in the eye and blurted out that he was a good guy, and that she loved him. Even the magician nodded along, and Ralph declared, if every merchant in the world were like Shiro, then the whole world would be better overnight. With a grateful heart, the main character thanked everyone, then snapped his head toward the liar and blurted, "I finally get it, this is why you all want to crawl back to that town." He volunteered to haul the dismantled pieces for every single one of them. The liar smirked and thanked him, then the moment stretched and he couldn't get another word out. So the main character whipped out his inventory skill and stuffed everything away, and everyone gasped when Shiro pulled off that kind of magic. Then later, he bowed his head and apologized for not telling them about his skill. But the leader grabbed his doubts and told him, "Don't you dare apologize, you just saved our lives." As the main character hauled himself back toward town, one step at a time. The leader slammed the brakes and demanded, "Are you really carrying the bears with spatial storage?" Then it hit time to press on and hunt those high-class herbs. The protagonist's adventure roared on for 2 more non-stop days. When he finally rolled back into town with the answers, Ina's face lit up like a flare, and she swept him in with an eager welcome. The leader clocked what was going on and shot her a question, "Is she your daughter?" And he scrambled to explain, saying Aina had saved him back at the store. Then he turned to Aina, introduced himself, handed her the store key, and ordered her to wait there. Then they tore off to the Silver Moon, ready to lock in the quest for real. When they finally came back, they couldn't believe it. There was the substitute guild master on her knees, begging for more time to pay back someone's money. He thought this was exactly how it was meant to play out, until his stomach dropped and he caught her on her knees begging that man. He snapped, saying she'd been promising to pay it back next time for 6 straight months, and he drew a hard line. This time he wasn't letting it slide. She shot back that she'd somehow find a way to have it by next month. Shiro pressed the leader for the man's identity, and the leader shrugged it off by saying he must have been nothing but a materials merchant. Right away, the protagonist marched up to the guy and introduced himself as a merchant who worked in town, then demanded the whole story, and the guy snapped back that he was the materials merchant Gerald. Gerald, Blotto's old guild buddy, vanished out of nowhere, and everyone knew what that meant. The guild's coffers were empty, so he bolted. To pull him back, Gerald handed Blotto 10 gold coins as a lifeline, taking the guild building as collateral. He even slammed a contract in their hands and screamed at the guild master like it was do or die, threatening that the guild building would become Gerald's the moment he failed to pay back the money. He pointed out that even selling the place, building and land included, would barely scratch the debt. Gerald then ordered Emil to grab the certificate for the building. But she wouldn't budge. Gerald pressed her hard, asking why she still clung to Blotto after he left her behind, and he told her to finally cut ties with that doomed guild. She snapped back that this wasn't about loyalty at all. This was the first place where, after people mocked her as a beast man, she finally felt like she belonged. This place held a mix of joy and heartbreak, but the happy memories hit harder than the sad ones, which is why it mattered so much to her and why she refused to let it slip away. It was a place where every step dragged up fresh memories. If Shiro's memory didn't fail him, it was 5 years ago, back in the summer, when his mother stormed in and said his grandmother had been missing for 2 years. They had already mapped out selling her house because he couldn't keep the details straight. Then he heard those words again. He burst into desperate begging like his life was on the line, begging them not to sell the house because it was packed with her precious memories, even though it was painfully humiliating to plead in front of all those relatives. He just couldn't stop. The merchant snapped that if it was personal, he completely understood, then pointed out the contract was part of it, and swore he already knew all about it. Suddenly, Emil leaned in and asked the protagonist to buy the entire guild for her. The merchant stared at the dismantled bear. The adventurers lugged in, shocked beyond words, then leaned in and realized it wasn't just any grizzly at all, it was Eunice, the subspecies. He leaned over and asked the protagonist if he could buy them, but the protagonist shut him down. Those were for the Silver Moon. Then the guildmaster cut in, saying their guild couldn't cough up the money. Still, the protagonist just smiled and promised, "You can pay whenever you're ready." Then the leader pitched a deal, let the merchant buy from them just like the protagonist, and the two of them nodded, agreeing he could pay them back later. So the merchant begged the mill to sell him everything for 32 gold. Then Emil burst in, demanding 36 instead. After they knocked off the guild's 10 gold debt, it dropped to 26, and the merchant still forked over 2 more gold to get the grizzly's balls, ending with 28 gold paid in total. The merchant stormed out, grinning as he promised there'd be even more mind-blowing deals the next time around. That's when the guildmaster started thinking maybe he wanted Silver Moon to keep breathing and stay alive. Emil thanked everyone, but the leader cut in and told her to thank Kairat too, because they were only doing what adventurers always do. Liar told her to finish the request first, but she snapped back that they had to talk right now because Kairat was standing right there. Then the protagonist asked if he could stay and she cut him off. No way, his part was over. She ordered him out and wheeled right back to Liar. He pressed her on how he'd handle a bodyguard job when the escort target was missing, then asked if she'd already locked in his safety and whether she was planning to cheap out on the reward again. She swore to him there was 0 chance she'd pull that kind of stunt. So the leader snapped that she'd better hand over 30 silver coins, and right when the protagonist opened her mouth to ask a question, Liar cut in fast, saying there was no time to bargain. Liar blurted that he'd already forked over 30 gold coins, so that left only 70 silver coins, right? And was that really the guild's handling fee? Right as Emil about to bolt, the leader yanked her from behind and barked for a full explanation, while the magician fumed, promising he'd incinerate that poor rabbit. Gila seethed, saying they wouldn't be forgiving her this time. The protagonist secretly thanked his lucky stars he didn't bring Aina, because deep down he knew he didn't want her there. When he finally came back from the guild, Aina was still scrubbing the stairs, and the moment she saw him, she lit up and bombarded him with questions about how his adventure went. They were deep in the forest, so he leaned in and spilled every detail to her. He laid out every wild detail from those last 3 days, and the sheer brutality of it all practically hit Aina like a punch. She stared in awe at how he crushed that grisly mess and raved about him. While he humbly gave credit to the Azure Flash for everything, a sudden knock rattled the store door mid-conversation. The protagonist swung it open, and there was Karen pounding on the door like her life depended on it. She clutched him in a tight embrace, scanning for any sign of injury like her fear could uncover it. But he smiled and told her he was totally fine thanks to the Azure Flash. Karen let out a breath of relief and couldn't wait to hear his adventure. She leaned in and asked what he'd learned while traveling with the adventurers. He told me he'd learned a ton and asked if he could load up on his brand new products before the upcoming inspection. Karen caught on to his insane storage skill and teased him with a grin. He tried to brush it off, but Karen's gut instinct nailed the truth. He confessed he had a storage skill too, and when a woman's intuition hits, he knew it wasn't just a hunch, it was power. Karen admitted she'd played him to the table as part of a bargaining practice, straight up tricking him on purpose. The mayor jumped into the conversation and declared that hagglers won't be slowed by the truth. Then the protagonist finally clocked the trick, swallowed his pride, and vowed to be way more careful from now on. As soon as the talk swung back to his products, he whipped out his brand new items, and Anna and Karen couldn't stop staring, completely hooked. But the mayor could barely swallow the idea that anything like that was even real. Right then, the adventurer's leader burst into the shop and asked what was really going on. The main character said Aina set up all the displays just for him. After the whole grizzly bear disaster, people finally spilled the truth. Those two jumped straight into dating. Liar pressed the question, was some big shot from a guild really rolling into town? And the main character nodded, leaving the whole party praying it was a respectable guild. And Kairat grilled people about the guilds with the worst reputations. Aina dropped the bombshell name, ***, the Devil's Trident ***, and the ** Fang of the Venom Dragon ***. But he called out the worst Aina-made churro curse, because the inspector guys weren't showing up and everyone started panicking that they'd gotten lost. Then he pointed at the delay like it was a crime, insisting they should have been here already since it's a straight shot from the next town. Karen had been stationed at the town entrance since yesterday, practically vibrating with excitement, waiting for them to finally show up. At last, the bell finally screamed that evening had arrived, and the main character urged Ina to clock out. She'd crushed her work today. It was just a bit too early, so he started to lock up, but right before the main character could leave, the lady stepped in and demanded to look at a few of his items. He agreed on the spot, and she shot back, asking if these were the exact items everyone in the city had been whispering about. The main character jumped in and offered a demo, and she looked genuinely blown away. Then she pointed at the silver thing and asked what it was, and he explained it was a space bracelet made to keep her warm. She went for it, and before anyone could even react, it hit like magic, shockingly effective. After she asked about the bottle, she flashed him a quick thank you and bolted out fast. A few days later, Anna finally told the main character that the inspector had arrived in town. Karen had been waiting on pins and needles, but when the plan flipped, her hope crashed hard. The mayor thrust Aina into action, sending her to drag Kairat all the way to Silver Moon for a surprise sit-down with the inspector. Inside the room, the main character greeted Shiru, and the mayor proudly hailed him as the city's top merchant. Then little Aina popped in and greeted him too. Gabus, the inspector, stared in shock. Aina was the only employee, and our main character clocked right away that Gabus looked totally green. Gabus tore into the guild building, sneering at how filthy it was and spitting out disgusting insults about subhumans. The mayor shrugged off his comments and kept his attention locked on Kairui's sales. Gabus stared at the rumored match cradled in Shiru's hand, then nodded like, "Yep, this is the good stuff." He slammed the news down. The Labyrinth Marauders were opening a whole new branch in town. But only if they got the exclusive right to be the one and only guild allowed. He looked back at Silver Moon like it was nothing, then swaggered in and said they didn't need it, promising they'd shut it down right away. Next, he demanded the whole branch be totally exempt from taxes because out here there's no way they'd turn a profit unless the government cut them slack. And then, no joke, he demanded exclusive rights to buy and sell those matches himself. The main character froze in shock at what he was hearing, and Gabus blurted out that the protagonist sounded painfully slow to get it. Then he demanded to know if he was really a merchant. Right after that, Gabus closed in on the protagonist and told him he planned to snatch up all his matches. Then, just as the attack was about to start, the mayor swooped in and demanded to know what Gabus wanted, because she was already in the middle of talking with that inexperienced guy. The mayor said Gabus could boost the town's future, but a monopoly on the matches was way too far, and Gabus shot back, acting like she couldn't possibly understand unless he dumbed it down for a country mayor. He leaned in and told her straight that the border town could only sell so much, then hit her with the question, "What do you think would happen if a nationwide guild snapped up every last bit of stock and raked in profits nobody could even imagine?" He admitted the idea sounded amazing, then slammed the brakes and said he had to turn it down, because he couldn't stock unlimited matches. The mayor shot that down too, apologized to him for nothing, then straight up said, if those are his demands, she'd rather restart the negotiations from the beginning. Gabus was seething, stuck on one question: why did he even drag himself out to this pathetic town with adventurers so weak and useless they barely mattered? Then the main character cut in, told him to wait, and spilled the truth. In the eastern forest, rare monsters, herbs, and metals were waiting. Gabus pressed him. Was that hook enough to start his own branch when adventurers already used this town as their launch point? He just barked out a laugh, calling it a pathetic excuse for adventurers who couldn't hack it in the capital or any big city, and he dismissed this town as having zero worth. Gabus leaned in and asked Kairat what he planned to do about the newbie. Then he pressed harder, saying that once they set up the branch, even this forgotten little town would start thriving. He stumbled back to his late grandmother's house, utterly baffled. He just felt her presence inside for a split second. Staring at her photo, he choked out a vow to follow her wish at the festival, no matter what. A woman confessed that Grandma Alice, the immortal witch, vanished right before last year's festival. Hope ignited in his eyes as he realized she could come back again this year. As the town's 2010 anniversary inched closer, he threw himself into prepping a stall just in case disaster or luck struck. Shiro threw out festival bond ideas one by one, rejecting anything risky or unfamiliar until he couldn't think of anything else but to rinse, then hunt for a safer alternative. With zero hesitation, he dug straight into his childhood and tore through forgotten memories, hunting for inspiration that was buried too deep to die. It hit him like lightning. Photography was the answer, because suddenly he remembered that dusty box of old cameras tucked away in storage. Cairo leaned in and told Aina that cameras weren't just toys, they could freeze unforgettable moments forever, and they'd even turn into a real money-making opportunity. He used magic right in front of everyone, snapped up Aina's smile, and threw the results onto the screen for all to see. Aina gaped at her photo, eyes blazing, completely crushed by the thought of her picture getting printed on something. Shiro broke down how the device could trap moments in time, and then urged her to start snapping even more photos herself. Soon, Aina beamed with pure excitement, flashing big smiles and rocking peace signs as the camera clicks rang out all around her. She steadied the camera, tapped the button to make sure, flashed a huge grin, and snapped a photo of Shiro right back. "Can't wait to find out," Aina blurted it out with wide eyes, and Shiro just nodded back, smiling like he'd nailed it. Even though Shiro swore nobody needed his photos, he still nailed pose after pose like he was daring the universe to judge him. Aina couldn't stop herself. She dug into a new camera that could do Polaroids, and the instant photo magic absolutely blew her mind. Aina blurted out a quick, candid snap, but the second she saw her own face, she grimaced and pouted at Shiro's shocked reaction. With payback simmering in her head, Aina whipped out a close-up of Shiro before he even had time to blink. The photo snapped into view, Shiro's wide-eyed, awkward grin, and the payback hit hard as you could practically hear their instant laughter. As Shirapanda reminisced, she poured her heart into a heartfelt haiku, sparked by the peace sign gesture her grandma used to make. Stella finally showed up, and the moment she did, she lit up with gratitude, thanking Shiro warmly for keeping an eye on her daughter again. They kicked back and chatted about Stella's fresh move, then Shiro's kind gesture lit up the moment. He'd rented them a place to stay. Aina called out Stella's messy cleaning, and the two adults just broke into chuckles at how hilariously honest the kid was. Even though Stella felt her cheeks burn, Shiro stepped in and offered help, and Aina paused, because she could feel that there was more to be said. Shiro let out an awkward laugh when Aina called him out, telling him he was just as terrible at cleaning too. With a bright, happy grin, Aina threw Shiro a wave and practically sparkled as she helped him. As they headed out, Shiro called after them, "Walk safe," and you could hear the relief in his voice, grateful they'd just pulled off another peaceful, productive day. The Silver Moon Guild, thought to be lost in the shadows, roared back to life under the Fairy Blessing Guild's full authority. As soon as he stepped in, the whole hall went dead quiet, until emerald soft sobs echoed through the silence. Adventurers spilled into the guild hall, trading wild updates and showing off the loot, because everyone finally knew the guild had truly clawed its way back to life. Emil mocked him without a hint of shame, certain he'd only come to see her with some secret, romantic agenda. She daydreamed furiously about marriage, grand carriages, towering castles, and even dragons, anything to guarantee a life dripping in gold and comfort. Emil didn't hesitate for a second. She started unbuttoning her top, saying she was warm and craving affection. Right when he made a move to slip out, she leaned in close and pitched them drinks in that hush-quiet room. He snapped back to his grandmother's last warning, never, ever trust a tipsy woman when you're alone with her again. Emil batted her eyes and played dumb, then snapped that he yanked her in close, acting like she was the one who'd been wronged. She lunged in so fast she erased the distance, then buried him under a storm of kisses while he screamed for an immediate rescue. Out of nowhere, a brutal kick streaked past Shiro with razor-sharp precision, slicing straight through the chaos. Kulfa slammed into the ground with a dramatic flare, grinning like he just saved the day as he intercepted the spreading madness at the exact right moment to help. Inside the guild hall, they clinked mugs together at last, finally tasting peace after the emotional chaos they just survived. While Shiro recovered, the others leaned in and picked apart Emel's behavior like it was no big deal, like this was just another everyday mess. Right when the world finally went quiet, Emil came storming back, jealous, furious, and already itching to run this whole thing again. Tension snapped through the guild when a reckless fighter stepped up and dared a smug, scholarly adventurer to a fight. Instead of stepping in, Shiro just watched, ice-calm like this was normal because in this place, guild brawls were treated like a daily bonding ritual. For 2 long months they hunted every ruin they could find, yet absolutely nothing showed up, crushing their hopes to dust. Tempers flared with every second, patience disappeared, and even the smallest disagreements detonated into brutal fistfights between guildmates. Boredom, tension, and isolation turned this town restless, and Emel's antics only kept punching the chaos higher. Mo leaned in, cheeks flushed, and made it painfully clear that Rhea's distraction wasn't the innocent kind. Trying to play it cool, Shiro got roasted the second he missed the brothel reference completely, still blushing anyway. A vicious jab to his foot shut down every excuse as accusations of laziness ricocheted around the table. As the tavern roared through the brawl, multiple voices snapped at Shiro to quit flirting. The guildmaster stormed in with a thunderous glare, and just like that, every fight froze and most people's hearts nearly dropped out of their chests. The adventurer spun into a frantic scramble to deny everything, while the guildmaster's furious disapproval slammed down into a thick, punishing silence. With graceful poise, the guildmaster let out a chuckle, apologized to Shiro, and kept sneaking glances at that suspicious bunny. She caught Emil in the act and demanded to know why she hadn't stepped in earlier to shut down all that chaos. Emil stumbled away in defeat, and right then a knight strode up to Shiro, handing her a strange favor. On their last ruin expedition, they crashed into a hidden pocket of the forest and found rare flowers tucked deep where no one expected them. Shiro nodded and signed up for the expedition, banking on his friend's raw strength to keep him safe. With everything set, they clinked their mugs together like it was a promise and kicked off their next wild trip into the unknown. The crew stumbled on glowing white lilies swaying softly in the sun, spread out across that quiet field like something magical had just woken up. Shiro recognized them instantly, Apsara, rare flowers that only bloom where the water stays pure and untouched. Lying among the blossoms, they couldn't stop thinking about Aina, wishing she'd been able to see all of this with her own eyes. Their break got yanked to a halt the moment the orders hit back to work, while the last scraps of daylight vanished fast. Just a week before all this, they stumbled across these flowers, the missing key to brewing top-tier healing potions that could work miracles. Halfway back, the Apsara started to wither, even as magic water poured over it and everyone fought to keep it safe. Instead of falling apart, the group clung to Shiro's one-of-a-kind gift, the very thing that could keep them alive and safe. With his dimensional inventory, Shiro snapped the flowers into stasis, freezing time itself and stopping their natural decay on the spot. Right before they left, the air itself shuddered with a weird, unnatural disturbance. Everyone froze as something impossible barreled closer. Suddenly, a brutal swarm of giant flying beetles tore out of the sky, their wings buzzing with pure menace. 17 massive beetles ringed the clearing, and a few limped in with fresh wounds from a fight that already happened. Up close, fresh injuries jumped out, like a sharp, wind-blast spell had just ripped through the area and was still hanging around. The creatures clocked the group's panic the second it erupted, orders started flying, and spells snapped into existence in seconds. Neska snapped her staff, and a massive fiery arrow tore through the sky, blazing straight into the swarm. Rolf hurled himself in front of Shiro, shield up high, bracing to smash through the oncoming insect monster. Even with the direct hit, that beetle refused to crack, and Kulfa burst in with a brutal counterattack. Neska ripped off another blazing spell, pouring in even stronger magic, while Kilfa kept the nearest enemies busy and off his back. Shiro clocked their fire weakness and snapped up a canister, swearing to everyone it wasn't just some plain bug spray. No hesitation, he snapped open a lighter, shot sparks into the air and watched the can's vapors ignite mid-flight. Shiro thrust his hands forward and a homemade flamethrower erupted, roaring flames blasting straight into the charging swarm. Shiro threw the signal and Rolf exploded forward at full power, aiming to smash the final wave to pieces. With one brutal punch, Rolf drove his fists through the beetle's head, cracking the carapace wide and blasting fluid everywhere. Morals roared as each fighter surged forward again, blades flashed in perfect sync while spells erupted and lit up the chaos. The beetles went down one after another, then coordination-type churra was screamed in, calling reinforcements from every side. Seeing how far they'd pushed, Shiro grinned. Those blue flash guys had blasted past their humble start. Beetles swarmed Nesca, Shiro's eyes snapped onto her, and his mind sprinted for a way out. He hesitated with the flamethrower blazing in his grip, terrified the blast radius would rope Nesca into the firestorm too. As Nesca staggered, Shiro shot forward on instinct, shouting for her safety and throwing himself between her and the nearest danger. Two giant beetles slammed into Shiro with a crushing impact, and his body twisted as pain swallowed him whole. With lightning speed, Rhea yelled at the river, pushing everyone to leap in now before the next wave could attack. Tossed violently by the raging current, Shiro fought for every breath, barely managing to keep his hand above the water. Nesca blurted out a desperate plea, summoning protective magic and begging the river spirit to shelter Shiro from any more damage. As he vanished into the haze, Rhea screamed his name, swearing with every breath that they'd track him down and bring him back. Shiro slipped into unconsciousness and his mind screamed one question: would anyone find him in time, or was it already too late? He jolted awake on the rocky shore, coughing like his lungs were on fire, gulping for air while their bodies shook and soaked in the trembling. Bursting out of the forest, a winged girl shot into view and announced, "I'm a fairy," but the rest of her sentence got tangled in confusion. While Shiro stalked through the forest, he raised his hand and hurled an actual fairy straight out of the air, hovering right in front of him. Caught by his wide-eyed stare, the fairy jerked back in embarrassment, and he shot his gaze away with a quick, apologetic fluster ending with, "Without a warning, a girl burst in and swore she'd yanked him out of the jaws of death, pulled him from drowning near that deadly waterfall." When Shiro finally explained the river incident, he admitted the truth. He hadn't been messing around in the water at all, he'd been sprinting away from monsters. The moment the fairy heard Nina Rich, she snapped into stunned disbelief, because she swore it was a far-off human town she recognized. She shot back an urgent demand to go to Ninorich, and it completely blindsided Shiro with how fiercely determined she sounded. Shiro hesitated for a second, then gave in, because she insisted on describing the sweet, sky-blue-haired humus she'd met before. Her messy, half-made description threw him off. He had to explain that fumes don't automatically recognize one another. She confessed she'd never learned his real name, so she'd always just called him Hume When Shiro asked if they were lovers, her face burst into heat. She snapped back, denying it, and you could practically see the frustration boiling. She cut it off fast, insisting there was zero romance, just two friends, even if that connection felt almost unbreakable. When they grilled her about the forest, she lit up and proudly said she was born and raised right inside it. Shiro pitched a wild deal. He'd guide her to Ninorich, but first she had to help him. She snapped up the offer without hesitation, swore she'd guard him with her life, and then unleashed her magical wind technique like a promise made real. A brutal slash ripped through the forest, and Shiro's eyes widened as her raw strength and razor-precise fighting left him fully impressed. Pride shimmered in her eyes, but she finally admitted it. Her magic control wasn't her thing. The second she tried, the trees got shredded. She bragged about wrecking the beetles earlier, leaving Shiro stunned when he finally realized she was the one behind that destruction. Right before they sealed their travel agreement, Shiro Amara and Patty Falulu made a proper introduction. No games, just business and excitement. She slammed the title down like a banner, demanding Shiro call her boss, even as he muttered mild objections. To keep her boss Shiro smiling with non-stop enthusiasm, he won Patty's loud, gleeful approval and sent her into an energetic celebration. Shiro teased everyone by putting on a servant act, then she shut that whole silly lackey routine down the second it started. Beneath the moonlit sky, he put on an overly formal voice, promising his service and begging to repay him for the rescue. Later, with the fire crackling, Patty leaned in and asked him straight up if he missed his friends from the human world. When she heard his answer, she snapped, "I'll help you search," and made it clear she was the boss. She proudly shoved food into the next group and quickly defended herself like, "I'm just being a responsible leader, taking care of her subordinates." Patty nonchalantly tore open a magical portal, and that's when Shiro's jaw hit the floor because she actually had the rare god-tier inventory skill. But the girl casually taps into her inventory skills, leaving the merchant stunned by how calm and confident she acts. She shrugs and tells you fairies can do that, then she casually yanks items right out of the glowing portal like it's nothing. Later, she thrusts a cup of her homemade mead into his hands, begging him to drink and get warm before nightfall. As he sips and relaxes, she rockets skyward, plants him in rest, and takes the watch herself. Beneath the moon's glow, he whispers his thanks, and with her quietly watching from above, he finally feels safe. Out of breath, the group huddles and argues about the forest's threats: ogres, goblins, and even elves crouched behind their barriers. They stop again, utterly drained, then Patty's eyes light up as she eagerly spots a baboona flower, warning everyone that its nectar tastes weird. Shiro remembers downing it by accident once, and she instantly barrels him with more facts, unstoppable as ever. Then he discovers that Gehenna used to be a whole nation, until it suddenly collapsed and the forest swallowed what was left. Suddenly Patty feels danger creeping nearby and she snaps, "Hide now," with zero doubt and zero questions. Worried cries bounced through the forest as Shiro's friends raced around in panic, terrified they were about to find the worst. The talking cat swore he was alive, and the whole crew erupted with renewed hope as they surged forward. When Shiro heard voices he knew nearby, he jolted upright on instinct, then Patty panicked and Shiro, furious, shoved past her warning. When he finally reunited with them, a warm grin spread across his face. He beamed, proud as ever, and called them his friends, his loyal, irreplaceable companions through every brutal struggle. His shout finally snapped through the air, and they bolted toward it, pounding hearts, pure relief flooding in. Right when Shiro called out, Pilfa came flying in, joy bursting out as she shouted his name to the sky. Right midair, she slammed into him so hard it ripped the air with noise, and the whole group snapped to attention. Tears spilled down her face as she sobbed, gripping him so tight, relief and terror crashing together like a storm. Shiro flashed a gentle smile and swore everyone was safe, and his friends broke down, clinging to him and refusing to let go. Still grateful but crushed by guilt, they swore they'd guard Shiro with their lives and repay his fearless courage. Even though the reunion caught Shiro off guard, he broke into a proud smile, just happy as hell to be back with his friends. A knight basked in praise for surviving, then he swallowed his pride and said, humble as ever, that he didn't come back through the forest alone. He introduced Patty, an insanely powerful fairy who'd already saved him, and just like that, his new ally showed up as an unexpected boss. The whole group froze in disbelief. Fairies don't mingle with outsiders, not ever, and Shiro's bond with her absolutely blew everyone's mind. Nervous as a heartbeat, she confessed she'd broken the rules, because fairies are supposed to stay hidden, never straying beyond their secret home. While Shiro joked about fairies, the others instantly clocked it. He had zero clue about their customs. The book blew the mystery wide open. Fairy's blessing wasn't a spell at all, it was a rare fairy brewed alcohol. Everyone went dead silent when he casually admitted he'd been drinking it, and the shock hit even harder the moment Patty confirmed the whole story. Everyone froze in shock the second Shiro confessed he'd accidentally gulped down that ultra-rare mythical fairy mead. Old records say it, not even a single drop ever showed up for more than 200 years, yet somehow the gratitude still poured out. Still shaking with relief, the adventurers thanked Patty to her face, and she puffed her chest out like a proud captain, bragging that Shiro was her underling. When they were asked to help track the person down, the whole group instantly nodded along even though they'd never seen their face, too. With fresh allies in tow, the party pushed through the forest together, barreling straight for Myra Ridge. Patty burst into excited cheers and pointed across the plains, where that distant human settlement shimmered under the looming mountains. As they closed in, they nailed down the settlement terms and Patty stepped up, proudly demanding they explore together. Deep in the town, a young girl stood stone still, staring at Shiro in silence from the alleyway. Shiro clocked her at once, then bolted forward. She clung to him with sudden, overwhelming relief. Tears streamed down his face as he clung to him for dear life, mumbling his name over and over while he fought to force out a response. When Shiro finally made it home, Stella was waiting with open warmth. She'd stayed up all night chewing her worries to pieces. Even when help was offered, she pushed it away and set her jaw she'd carry Ine herself before her strength ran out. She refused to let go of her daughter, clutching those precious seconds like they might vanish the moment she blinked. With a soft smile, Stella stepped into position and made it crystal clear she was her daughter, not anyone else's. Right before heading out, Shiru spun back to say goodbye the right way, giving Stella and Ine a heartfelt farewell. Stella met him with a bright, warm grin, and sleepy Ina popped out from behind her like she couldn't resist the moment as. With storm clouds drifting overhead, he tipped his chin up and softly announced, "I'm coming home." Inside, Patty couldn't stop staring. Shiro's house was massive, and it absolutely blew her away. Cairo leaned in and asked about fairy homes, and Patty lit up, saying their dwellings sat high in the trees guarded by monsters' wards. Promising to start their search tomorrow, those words lit up her excitement like fireworks, and the two of them burst into a joyful celebration, and then he grilled Patty about fairy mead, and she told him the secret's simple: if honey's there, the drink is too. She flinched at the memory of a brutal bee attack, while he calmly reached for a jar of honey like it was nothing. Patty couldn't believe the honey's quality. She licked it eagerly, eyes wide with shock and pure wonder. She lit up at the first sip and announced her next mead batch was going to blow it out of the water. Cairo, wiped out from the road, crumpled onto the couch, finally relishing the comfort after another night spent sleeping out in the open. Ine, roused from sleep, stood beside the couch and wore a serious, unshakable look like she'd already decided what to do next. She didn't hesitate. She climbed onto him and blurted that Stella had sent food from home. Patty's conversation with them screeched to a halt when she shot upright, eyes narrowed, and demanded, "Who was this mystery girl?" Ine beamed as she cheerfully introduced herself, still reeling that she'd finally met a real fairy, straight out of her books. Curiosity sparked in Patty, and she grilled Shiro about what she did. Shiro revealed that she'd been helping him at work. He started grilling everyone for the blue-haired guy, but she and Ine shook their heads. They hadn't seen a single person who matched his description. Even with zero leads so far, Shiro stayed hopeful and insisted that the moment they kept pressing, asking around, they'd track him down. Ine practically jumped at the chance to help search, then reminded everyone she still had to be hiding somewhere. Suddenly brimming with inspiration, she pointed out the perfect hiding spot for Patty, then twirled with playful flair while lifting her dress hem. She peered out with nervous caution, cheeks burning, and still nodded, then swore she'd stay tucked away and hidden while they swept the whole town in their investigation. With Patty tucked safely inside Ina's backpack, the trio tore through town on a mission to find Shiro's friend. Shiro pushed up to the townspeople, pendant in hand, praying someone would spot that one-of-a-kind design. He quizzed every vendor, beastfolk, and traveler he could find, wore himself out asking, but all he got were friendly shrug smiles and a hard lack of answers. Specialists and merchants threw out wild theories, but not a single record lines up with the pendant's shape, its stone, or where it came from. Even the slickest informants and the toughest locals shut their mouths tight, swatting him away like he wasn't worth a single look. After 27 dead-end inquiries, Shiro finally understood the pendant's truth wasn't just hidden, it was buried way deeper than anyone ever guessed. A solid new clue surfaced about the missing girl once said to live in Norwich, but locals still hadn't confirmed it. Karen burst in out of nowhere and there was Shiro, safe and sound, so she jolted with surprise before relief washed over her. She snapped at his reckless choices, bringing up Ria's party like a weapon, while Shiro fought to explain why he'd gone quiet. Even with worry gnawing at her, Karen flashed him a warm smile and soothed him with a gentle, comforting gesture. Right as their moment started to feel real, another villager grabbed the pendant and shoved her curiosity into full view, staring as her face lit up with questions. Karen locked eyes on the pendant, recognition sparked in her chest, but before she could place it, she tore herself away and left. She swore she'd come back the moment that pendant's origins sparked in her mind again. As she turned away, Shiro shot her a question: was she planning to see Emil again? She didn't answer. She snapped out her real goal, marching straight to the blue flash party to call them out for endangering Shiro. Karen brushed off his protests with a smug laugh and strode away with total confidence, leaving Shiro flustered as he called after her like it would change anything. Once Karen left, Ine's nerves went through the roof as she hurriedly asked Shiro and Patty if they'd stay and sleep right beside her tonight. Even as heat flooded her cheeks, Patty still played it cool and accepted the request, though she swore it was only temporary. At her aunt's place, Aina beamed at her mom with warmth and started setting the stage to finally spill a secret she'd guarded with her life. Her mother flashed a curious smile, clueless that her daughter's trembling voice was hiding something far more serious. With her heart pounding, Ine shoved her hand into her bag and the suspense climbed. while her mom pictured all kinds of wild, maybe not so great squishy surprises. Patty burst out of the bag, stunned to her core by just how perfectly Aina looked like her mother. Every own froze, Aina's mother nearly dropped the bag when she discovered a fairy girl tucked inside. Patty practically bounced across the bed, her whole body buzzing with pure delight at how soft and cozy it felt. Over tea, Ine leaned in with burning curiosity and pressed Shiro for the truth, what kind of man he really was. With their questions piling up, Patty finally caved with a long sigh and agreed to spill every last detail. Patty kicked off her story, and as she spoke, she vividly replayed the very first moment she stepped out of her mystical forest home. As she wandered, she caught sight of a hunter in full panic mode, desperately trying and failing to snare a jackalope. She kept watching him blunder over and over, and then she burst into laughter until tears rolled down her face. She couldn't stop smiling at how pathetic yet truly determined he was. Her patience finally snapped, and she unleashed magic to help him take down the creature. Shocked speechless, the boy stared at her with eyes blazing bright, grateful wonder pouring out of him. The boy froze, staring at her wings like they couldn't be real. Then it hit him. He'd truly stumbled onto an actual fairy. He dropped to his knees in stunned silence, drowning in that jaw-dropping flavor, choking back quiet tears as he savored every bite of cooked jackalope. Days without food had wrecked him. This ragged stranger finally admitted he was starving while the others fought to force down the meal. Grateful but still shy, he asked for her name, only for her to dodge it and instead fire back a challenge that tested his skills. Sunbeams punched through the treetops the moment their uneasy alliance kicked off. This morning hit even brighter than the last. Through crushing failures and brutal battles, his aim finally sharpened. Watching her every step, confidence slowly crawled back into his bones. And after nailing his hunt, he strutted up with total confidence and demanded her name again, the one she'd once refused to give. Suddenly that brutal memory hit her like a punch, every rejection echoing in her head, so fear locked her tongue and stole her voice. Even from miles away, she could still feel their bond and remember how he'd looked her in the eyes and called them friends. Filled with resolve, she finally confessed she wanted to be reunited, to share her name and to hear his in return. Her tears cracked their hearts, and the girls swore they'd help her hunt for the truth, no matter what came next. The night crumpled to the ground as her friends steadied their promise. Then that renewed vow flooded her with power through the name she dared to speak. Far away, a man basked in quiet comforts, totally oblivious as trouble slowly crept in and his peace began to get stormed over. Rhea's sudden arrival ripped through the calm, and the moment it hit, his battered body demanded immediate attention and instant worry. Scars clawed across his face, but he brushed it off with a forced grin, like the real pain was something he refused to show. Miles planted himself in front of the mayor before any judgment could drop, standing his ground and ready to take every bit of blame, yet the words caught in his throat like he couldn't even finish. A searing slap crackled through the air, sentenced in impact, not words, delivering forgiveness without a single spoken syllable. Moments later, the tension finally cracked open, and that guild invitation promised a lighter vibe and some genuinely good company. Around the table, laughter and clinking drinks exploded in the air as the friends counted down, seconds from cheering. Smiles cracked across their faces as their voices surged together, old companions celebrating side by side and basking in that warm, soul-soothing reunion. Even with the laughter flying, a quiet understanding sparked between them, built on truths they'd both swallowed too deep to ever say aloud. With booze running thin, people started worrying fast, talk turning into tense tavern stares, and everyone fretting over the rising price of supplies. Some people chased after cider or wine, no matter how the local stuff turned out sour or let them down with a dull flavor. Laughter bounced around the table as everyone's wine habits spilled the real truth. There was a deep cultural divide hanging between the worlds. Surprise erupted in the room as he broke down red, white, and the rare Rouse wine like it was a secret only he could spill. Charles Fahey laid out flavor ranges, price tiers, and regional traits, turning a casual drink into something way more intriguing. With every gaze locked on him, he stammered out a shaky explanation of his homeland's massive global alcohol trade. Cheers burst across the table, but his mind sprinted ahead, sensing something bigger than just casual admiration. A wild idea hit like lightning. Importing alcohol right here could kick off a cross-world business that's basically unbeatable, so tell me that doesn't sound brilliant. He jolted back to his feet and spilled a game plan that could rake in wins all at once. With bold swagger, he swore he'd be back in 3 days, bringing drinks from his world in hand. He strode toward the hall under moonlight, his chest aching, and that fierce resolve in his steps felt like something he'd never known before. Tonight, Shiru dressed sharply not for battle, but for something way more personal and totally unpredictable. Inside the guild bar, Aina and Stella waved him in with big smiles, totally blown away by how effortlessly elegant he looked. The busted-together bar stood waiting, and Shiro had turned the entire drinking hall into Bar Shiro, solo. While the kids pleaded to lend a hand, Neska's ice magic started cooling their drinks, and Shiro's wild, unusual evening was only just getting started. Cairo passed out drinks to his helpers, and each one grabbed their go-to. Some swore by liquor, others picked wine, and a few played it safe with something mild. The crowd started squirming and roaring over each other, desperate for a drink. Shiro stepped up in front of everyone, chest puffed with pride, and announced with full confidence that the bar was officially open for the celebration. He cracked open drinks from his shop and passed out the snacks he'd made, lifting the whole room's spirits with pure, unstoppable generosity. He coughed up 3 million yen, yet he grinned anyway. Tonight's feast was on him, and every single drop kept pouring out free for all. To slammed the door shut, and Shiro brought Mirage, the elegant guildmaster, on stage to deliver the final words, blessings, and a clean send-off. The crowd surged forward like a wave of pure hype, and for a split second they almost trampled Shiro as cheers exploded through the guild hall. Mirage swept the tension away with pure grace, then Rhea went hunting through Shiro's impressive stash, desperate for a drink. Anna slid over a tipad lime juice, and Rhea took it with wide-eyed curiosity, hooked by her bold suggestion. One sip hit him, mild fizz, sharp sour zest, then pure delight erupted in his mouth, and Rhea stared wide-eyed, buzzing with excitement. Rhea's drink blew up the moment it hit the table. People crowded in, craving that punchy lime and salt twist and snapping up orders like it was pure magic. Orders kept crashing in back-to-back, and Aina and Stella scrambled behind the bar, barely staying on their feet as request after request hit. No break at all. The very next customer surged up, demanding something strong, and behind the counter, confidence flared like a spark. Eldos, the legendary warrior, sent the request, and whispers tore through the streets as he hunted for the strongest drink he could get. Link grinned and lifted the bottle, 96% spiritus, so lethal it could ignite the instant it touched the air. Clutching a little glass, Eldos grumbled through clenched teeth, his pride ignited at being treated like a child. Even after the warning screamed about how deadly strong the alcohol was, he pushed through anyway, laughing and boasting that he'd never get drunk a day in his life. Nervous that a scene would strike, Shiro begged for reason, while Eldos slid straight into escalation. Tension snapped into place as Eldos slammed his hand down, daring Shiro to square up and settle it with a fight over drinks. A calm voice cut through the air. Rolf, priest of Florine, stepped up to Eldos and introduced himself with full, formal respect. With pride mocking him, Eldos clutched his heritage booze from the moment he was born, honor forged the hard way, straight from dwarven tradition. Rolf threw out a magical ace in the hole. His healing spell could rip the alcohol straight out of Eldor's system in an instant. Everyone nodded in full agreement. If Eldos fell and collapsed, Rolf would snap him back to life. Nobody challenged the terms. Past monster-slaying wins had Eldos swaggering, and he sneered at weakness, remembering every brutal beast he'd crushed. With a daring wager, Eldos swore he'd obey if he slipped, gambling his pride on one thing: undeniable proof. Eldos threw his full barrel up in the air, demanding it, and when the moment hit, he locked those wager-free drinks in place forever, overflowing on command. Alcohol streamed in, and Shiro snapped to attention, agreeing to the terms, while Eldos grimaced as the smell hit, admitting its strength was unfamiliar and utterly overpowering. Eyes narrowed, he tipped the barrel back and chugged. His fearless speed left everyone watching completely stunned. Gulp after gulp boomed through the arena, and the crowd just stared, stunned as he drained every last drop without even pausing once. Breath tearing from his chest, he pushed through it, heat roaring through his veins, burning pain sinking deep in his gut. Eldos flashed a confident grin and pressed Shiro for the truth. Then Shiro finally conceded, admitting he'd completely misread what his guest could handle. Laughter exploded the moment Eldos declared victory. Then he swaggered forward and demanded lifetime drinks, soaking up every second of his win. Moments later, dizziness hit like a truck. Cheers died instantly as Eldos crumpled to the ground, knocked out cold before he could finish his victory celebration. After downing way too much, the hero crumpled to the ground. Erdo stayed cool, tore into him, and warned that one more slip could have ended his life, all because a spell had stopped the worst of it. Blood-hot embarrassment washed over the hero as he slumped in silence, while the crowd stared and whispered that alcohol had finally knocked the mighty one flat. News hit the streets fast. Before long, everyone was calling that drink Hero Slayer, and across the land people were laughing about how the liquor had somehow fallen onto a hero's fate. They passed out Euro-free bottles and the adventurers erupted in cheers, downing them until they dropped, some swearing the taste was unreal, others already plotting to bring that sip back to their families. Behind the counter, the merchant flashed a grin. Yeah, it was pricey, but it paid off fast, and buying their loyalty with alcohol was a smart gamble for the future. Tension snapped through the tavern when Shiro handed out the delivery jobs. Threats flew like sparks, but he stayed ice calm, smoothed it over, and pitched it as just the group blowing off steam. Laughter burst through the air as playful slaps flew back and forth, and Shiro just stayed cool, steady enough to get praised while the chaos raged all around. Questions snapped from casual to serious in seconds. Then one man spotted fairy wings stuffed in a box, demanded the truth about why Shiro was really recruiting adventurers, and Shiro only smirked with a guarded smile like he wasn't ready to spill everything. A staff member hurried over and asked if Shiro had found his friend. Shiro's silence answered first, and when he finally spoke, it was only a soft, defeated nod. The man offered a soft apology in the shadows nearby, and over there a girl sat curled up by herself, alone, invisible and unheard by the friend, while Shiro still held onto hope he could find a. All alone in a silent room, the girl curled up small and whispered sorry for all the chaos she'd caused, while Shiro stood behind the counter, still hunting for the answers like they were just out of reach. Days dragged on as rain hammered the streets, and no matter what they tried, they never found Shiro's friend until that last flicker of hope finally died out. They grilled everyone about the necklace, shoved posters into hands, and hit town after town, but not a single soul had seen him, and just like that, the trail went dead cold. Fresh questions exploded in his mind. If Hume really lived in all those places, maybe the friend just packed up and vanished far beyond reach, and the answers felt like an infinite maze. With 1,000 places to search and no clue in sight, doubt crawled into her mind as she stared out the window, praying, no, demanding to know how anyone could ever find a missing person in a world this huge. Karen stormed in with a grim face and a box in hand, then flat out told them she might know exactly who they were hunting. She popped the box open and the crystal necklace inside hit the air like a flare. Right when Shiro locked eyes with it, recognition slammed into him because he'd seen this exact necklace before. Karen traced its roots to her great-grandfather, the very first mayor of Nenirich, who'd once owned that necklace. To make the link click, they sketched out a family tree, so the younger ones could finally see just how far back their bloodline truly went. Karen shot him a puzzled look, demanding why Shiro was hunting for her ancestor, and Shiro answered without hesitation. He confessed it was his own idea that kicked the whole search into motion. Karen froze in shock as the girl finally unveiled she was a fairy, and Shiro stayed wordless while the truth crashed down in front of them. With her heart finally accepting the truth, Karen realized her ancestor once knew a fairy. Then the girl didn't waste a second and shoved forward with raw urgency. She tried to spell it out. Karen was really his descendant, wasn't she? Then she had to know where he ended up, because surely she did. Karen's confusion hit hard when the girl pushed her theory, saying it was obvious someone in the family had handed down where he'd been. Karen froze and the pieces finally clicked. Those connections weren't random at all, and the truth buried for generations was starting to rise to the surface. Karen asked how long fairies live, and as Patty paused mid-step on the stairs, she said fairies can reach about 3,000 years, then casually admitted she was only 300 herself. That answer snapped everything into focus. Humes got Karen explaining that she barely hits 100, then her eyes flicked to Shiro, who stays silent for a beat before the truth lands. Reality hit hard. The man they were hunting had died ages ago, and the only trace left of him was a memory slipping away fast, until none of them could even remember. Old memories crashed into Patty's mind. Rejection, fear, and that suffocating loneliness kept stalking her, even though all she ever wanted was one real connection. Accusations kept hounding her, curses clinging to her name, and the crowd shouted for her to be thrown out. No one ever stood up for her, and the faint hope she had snapped shut the moment fear was confirmed. Alone beneath the window's cold glow, she sat frozen in place, drowning in a crushing sense of worthlessness as even her own family turned their backs on her. On a pitch-black night, silence clawed her onward, no fear left, no options left, so she tore out of the village and disappeared into the forest's dark embrace. A stranger stepped out of the woods, and for the first time someone looked at her with nothing but kindness, no fear, no disgust. Gratitude flared across his face as he thanked her, and she wouldn't give her name until he had chased and conquered his dream. Then his smile lit something warm inside her. Her world shattered the silence she used to dread. Laughter flooded in. They trained, played, and explored together, turning every shared second into memories she'd never let go of, and for the first time in her life she finally felt like she mattered. She'd never felt real conflict, until that day when a fight erupted out of nowhere, and for the very first time she stopped backing down and stood her ground. Digging followed, and right under the soil, joy finally broke free, turning hard work into play until laughter came out like it belonged there. Danger slammed into the scene out of nowhere, razor claws flashed, heavy breath thundered, and that beast didn't hesitate for a second. She stood there, frozen in place as someone stepped right in front of her and blocked death. No hesitation, he moved like a storm, and every hit screamed one thing: he would guard her even if it cost him everything. Half buried in the dirt, breathing hard, he grinned and thrust a necklace into her hands. Now we match. That gift locked their bond in place, and she finally understood she wasn't alone anymore. Outstretched hands didn't just hand over a gift, they offered a real proof of friendship, sealed in matching necklaces and backed by pure, sincere intent. Even if the world shoved them apart, that token would keep their connection burning. It wasn't just some little keepsake, it was a promise with teeth. He talked about best friends, and the words hit her like she couldn't possibly be hearing them, because nobody had ever said anything like that to her before. She leaned in as he broke down what it really meant: closer than friends, like the kind of bond that mattered more than anything, and even though the name was brand new, it somehow felt like coming home. Emotion slammed into her like a wave, and her eyes suddenly burned with tears. This time they weren't about pain or rejection at all, they were pouring out pure, unstoppable joy. He leaned in and asked her name, reminding her, soft but firm, of the promise they'd made. She gave a shaky smile, and the gravity of the moment started to crush down on her. The words were right there, begging to be spoken. But then doubt slammed the brakes, and terror crept in that saying her name could shatter the bond they'd finally forged. But she urged them to wait until next time, because deep down, fear clung to her, whispering that the moment they named it, everything would finally collapse. He accepted it without a single doubt, and the moment he turned away, she just stood there, silent as stone, while that name stayed locked in her throat, buried under hope and fear. Patty stood on the deck, staring at the blank stretch where he used to stand, her old safe haven gone in an instant, and the shock hit her like a punch, so suddenly. When he pressed her for her plans, Patty finally confessed she had nowhere left to go, cast out of her village, and even the fairies had turned their backs on her, her voice trembling as she struggled to make him understand. No hesitation, she bared a secret mark carved into her skin, and even with her face calm, the whole room suddenly felt heavier, the faint glow sparking under her fingertips. That crest, an infamous mark tied to ruin, hung over her like a curse, and among her people everyone feared it. Anyone born with it got cast out, left to live alone. It tore her parents apart and shoved her into abandonment, leaving her to curse her own existence, until this day, when she finally stood her ground and spilled her truth without an ounce of shame. A swarm of flyshell bugs crashed into the forest and steamrolled the fairies with sheer numbers, turning the infestation into a tidal wave with no way to stop it. Their nests kept growing, and so did their numbers. Without anything to stop them, they burst outward and tore through everything in their path without even a second thought. Panic slammed into the villagers, and their terror turned on her. Accusations flew as they declared her the reason for everything, shouting that her very presence caused the disaster. He shoved forward and shut down their claims, his voice sliced through the doubt as he insisted she wasn't to blame for the insect showing up. But she didn't even blink. She straight up confessed the curse she carried, the one that terrifies people to this day, and even her name was a mercy given in pity, not something she truly owned. Patty Falulu, her name literally meant the one who tears off fate, and it sounded like hope itself until the elders still called her cursed and drove her out. She replayed their first meeting in the forest, one desperate gamble to save a stranger, never expecting it to matter, and yet it kicked everything into motion. As tears spilled into Aina's eyes, Patty forced a smile anyway. Pain still raged inside, but she met it head-on with quiet acceptance, swearing to herself she was the bigger fool. Patty reached for Ine with trembling gentleness, swallowing her own tears, because if Ine broke down, she didn't know if she'd survive staying strong. Meanwhile, the merchant stayed stone-still, eyes locked on the moment. Then it finally hit. He spoke up, ready to push things forward as the air between them started to crackle with what came next. He locked eyes with Patty, calm but unshakable, and straight up demanded, did she want to save the other fairies with? Without a single pause, Patty blurted out, yes. Even after all the rejection she'd taken, her heart still refused to turn cold. She couldn't stop thinking about the chief who gave her that name and about her parents who still clung to that village. Sure, they threw her out, but they were still stitched into her life. With her chin up, Patty doubled down on her choice, no matter how much hatred burned or how deep the old wounds still ached, because she refused to leave behind the people who had once been her family. With her resolve blazing, he grinned like the answer was obvious and made it feel effortless. If she wanted to save them, then they'd save everyone side by side. Patty shook with nerves as she begged him to be sure he could do it, then he snapped back instantly, of course I can. Her plea rang out and Aina's answer hit right after. Together, they threw their trust in him without a second thought, and he snapped the decision shut before driving them forward. Their first stop was the Adventurers Guild, because if they were going to find the help they needed, it had to be there. Inside, Shiro's words about the flyshell bugs snapped the room to attention, and murmurs exploded into shocked cries as everyone realized just how massive the threat really was. But their hopes slammed straight into brutal resistance. The guild clerk shut them down, not just no, but 200% impossible, and the very first step they tried to take turned into a solid wall. That flyshell nest looked so massive it felt impossible. Only a full-scale operation backed by half the Adventurers Guild could clear it. But while everyone chased that bigger picture, most members were stuck on ruin expeditions, because that nest was so out of the way it gave them nothing strategic, and it would have drained their manpower and money dry. With every door closed, the clerk spun away like his hands were tied, and Shiro was left at the table, watching his plan quietly fall apart. Right before she left, Shiro snapped her attention with his voice, no begging, no panic, just a sharp business offer proposing a shift like it was a deal. She froze in shock, then Shiro's confidence snapped back into place. He wasn't on his knees begging, he was ready to seal the deal and make it worth their while. A burst of magical light exploded through the air and Shiro fired off his spatial storage skill. Right then, a portal ripped open and left the whole room utterly speechless. He stepped up with total calm and slid it into the mix like, this is my part of the deal, I'm bringing this to the fight. He laid out his master plan using his skill as a supply line. While everyone else chased after ruins, he'd haul the resources himself, so they'd be free to save time, energy, and effort. The guild clerk waited up, smart, fast, and straight up profitable. Shiro's grin flashed with confidence, but the girl wasn't finished judging it yet. She fired back with her own spatial magic, flashing that same storage skill. She could haul enough carriage loads to make it clear she meant business, and suddenly it wasn't a one-sided fight anymore. It was a negotiation between equals. Despite Shiro's best effort, the clerk shut him down and delivered a rock-solid apology, while Aina's eyes brimmed with tears as the last shred of hope slipped away. Just as despair started creeping in, a booming voice cut through the air. Then a towering warrior stepped forward, and when Shiro turned, he found Eritos, the one man who would change everything. Shiro stood trembling at the guild counter, begging for help with a pest problem in the eastern forest. Then a massive warrior nearby clocked his panic and stepped in without hesitation. Julius clocked him for a moment, then the warrior accepted Shiro's request without a single delay, so Shiro just froze, staring in shock at the instant agreement. Still totally lost, Shiro demanded to know why a man this skilled would stoop to a small job. Then the warrior smirked at him like he was hiding the real, long-forgotten reason. With a roaring laugh, the warrior snapped Shiro back to a past drunken bet. Shiro finally remembered the challenge and the reckless promise he'd made over strong drink. He lifted his weapon high like a banner and swore he'd follow through, while everyone else laughed that massive exterminations were impossible, so he just stood there, itching to prove them wrong. Right when Eritos bragged he could take the mission by himself, a band of adventurers crashed the moment, overhearing everything and rushing in to join him. The guildmaster shot in like a bolt of lightning, barking the official rules as everyone froze. No one could take outside quests without the proper mediation, and she absolutely would not let that breach slide. Even with the objections flying, the truth got laid out. Erdos wasn't taking some standard quest at all, he was pushing through a personal challenge rooted in an old bet. The adventurers made it crystal clear this wasn't about rewards or glory at all. They just wanted to stand by their friend, no payment, no recognition, period. More people threw in the same take. Since there was zero reward, it didn't qualify as a real, official quest. In their eyes, helping a friend who needed them was reward enough. Shiro felt the weight of everyone's support hit him all at once, and he forced himself to stay calm. Then he tossed out a tiny promise, a celebration after the mission, and the moment those nearby adventurers heard it, their ears perked up instantly. He tossed out a casual mention of a rare drink called fairy mead for the post-mission celebration, and the second the words hit the room, everyone went wild with shock and curiosity. The second the legend of the fairy mead hit the air, more adventurers surged forward to join the hunt, because that sweet promise suddenly felt way more powerful than the risks ahead. Just as the adrenaline hit, a harsh voice cut through the noise, snapping everyone into separate duties, yet the orders collided with what each person wanted, and confusion exploded everywhere. Doubts erupted over whether the fairy mead was the real deal, until Shiro stepped up and swore it was true, and his companion backed him up, sending the whole group's excitement and grit through the roof. A sudden burst of motion snapped everyone's attention as the fairy shot forward and proudly took credit for the mead, her reveal proving it was real and leaving the whole room stunned. Confusion erupted. One guild member cornered Shiro, demanding answers, and the moment she saw a real fairy, her whole face went pale with shock. Shiro finally got the full story. Patty, the fairy herself, was the one who begged for help, because she needed that bug nest wiped out to save her fellow fairies, not for any reward but for their very survival. Sensing the danger in every heartbeat, Shiro bowed so deeply it felt like a vow, because this wasn't about favors or mead anymore, it was about saving lives. Others fell in behind his lead, and that guild girl promised to brew mead for anyone who lent a hand, because now our mission had teeth: protect the fairy's home, no matter what. With raw desperation shaking her voice, the fairy dropped into a deep bow and begged for help, pleading for them to save the forest and the family trapped inside it. The guildmaster froze for a second, then let out a resigned sigh, because that emotional plea had turned her into the villain in everyone's eyes, and she finally couldn't hold her ground anymore. She snapped her voice up, slammed her choice down, and with the guildmaster's authority, she barked for every available adventurer to gear up and move right now. The mission was crystal clear: wipe out the flyshell bugs hiding in the eastern forest, and warriors, merchants, and mages all showed up, ready to unleash everything against the threat. After a brutal long journey, they finally reached it. Right there, standing ancient and ruined, the nest's entrance loomed dark and threatening, and the fairy's words sealed it. This was the place. Cairo and Lyre verified the structure in front of them, and boom, they knew it was the very root of the fairy crisis, trapping the fairies so they couldn't break free or leave. Guild members stared in disbelief. This wasn't just some nest. It was an ancient ruin, a cave that somehow, over generations, mutated into a creepy, mysterious fortress. The moment the guildmaster sensed the danger, he snapped everyone into formation and laid out the plan: split the forces into 3 tightly coordinated squads to slash the losses. The elite mithril rankers would crash in first, the gold ranks would lock down the exits, and the silver and everyone below would sweep up any stragglers left behind. They dubbed it the Flyshell Bug Destruction Plan, an ironclad operation with stacked ranks, exact positions, and ruthless precision, built so not one enemy slipped through. Right when everyone thought the plan was locked in, Erdo burst into the battlefield by himself, alone, sudden, and terrifying everyone, just as the guildmaster warned they should keep him in reserve. His reckless move shattered the whole plan, so the rest of the team snapped into a new formation fast, refusing to be left behind, wrapping their defenses around Shiro and everyone else. No hesitation, this crew surged ahead together, and with the Erdos leading the charge, they barreled into the nest, hellbent on wiping out every last flyshell bug in there. The crew huddles outside the cave, glancing at the clock after 2 long hours, and worry keeps swelling because their comrades are still trapped in there. A man bursts out of the cave, cackling like he already owns the win, taunting them for worrying, and then declaring the battle over for good. Inside, a hulking fighter stands tall and boldly claims every last enemy is gone, and his companion just nods, no stragglers left. The group can't stop wondering, was a queen or even a final boss hiding behind that swarm of enemies they just crushed? But the strong man shuts that idea down. His stomach growls louder than any argument, and he's hungry and itching to get his food instead of talking more. The crew throws a wild celebration, and one member grins like he just won it all, blasting those flyshell bugs and sealing the victory for everyone. Buzzing with excitement, another member blurts out that they should tell the fairies in the cave about their win, but everyone hesitates. Suddenly, a scream for help tears through the air, and panic erupts as the group whips around, stunned and desperate with no clue where it came from. One of the fairies bolts off in a panic, shouting that she'll be back in a flash to help the others. A far-off fairy comes sprinting through the air, then a monstrous creature lunges out of nowhere, smashes the moment, and drags her into captivity. The whole group jolts as a fairy swings for a wind cut to break the creature gripping their comrade, but she hesitates, terrified she'll accidentally slice the fairy trapped in its grasp. In a panic, the fairy's companion screams at the creature to let her go, then lunges at it in pure fury. Right here, one of the crew barrels in, locks onto the creature's weak spot, and the whole team moves as one, because they're not just fighting anymore, they're going to pull their captured ally back out alive. A blazing spell erupts, summoning a savage gust of wind that slams the creature and shoves it stumbling backward. A magical icicle spear rams straight through the creature, and the team snaps the situation back under control. The squad rushes to their injured comrade, and you can feel the relief hitting. Everyone's pouring thanks out to Kulfa and Neska for yanking them to safety in time. Lyre and Rawl sprinted in frantic circles, hunting for their friends and praying they were safe, all while they fought off swarms of flyshell bugs. A member suddenly realizes it's gone way too far, because a monstrous swarm of bugs erupts from the nest and clamps around them from every direction. They stare at it in pure disbelief, and another group member can't stop asking, "How did we miss this?" as they wonder how those bugs slipped out of the nest. They stumble on a secret escape route in the nest, only to realize it's been slammed shut by piles of fallen bug bodies. The whole group panics when the fairy blasts a warning, "Move now or the swarm will smash straight into the cave where everyone's hiding." He thought he was about to lose his mind, swung his blade at the oncoming swarm, and then, horror hit, he realized the bugs just kept coming, no end in sight. One of the team members comes up with a wild plan to forge a raging flame tornado. Then the crew locks in, stacks their skills, and launches the attack as one. The attack hits harder than anyone dared hope, blasting away a huge chunk of the swarm, and the crowd erupts in cheers as pure relief floods the air. A fellow member cracks a joke at Enchan's expense, teasing him for being no great mage and showing off his lack of magical skill. The crew finally spots the gigantic flyshell queen, and when horror hits them at that massive scale, they know they've got to move now or it's going to slam them with an attack. Anshan cracks his knuckles and offers to try again with his skill, but the queen launches its assault right away. Pressure crashes down like a tidal wave. The queen rockets forward with a terrifying lunge, jaws blazing wide, and Chan snaps into action, bracing hard as he gears up to strike back. With a thunderous smash, a thunderbolt erupts, blasting the queen with brutal force and turning the whole battlefield into a crackling storm of sparks. Erdos finally bursts in, yanking out an apology for the wait, and the moment he arrives, the battle flips. Then he explodes with pure, unstoppable fury. Erdos tells the Enchan, "You don't need to thank me," because all he's doing is getting back what he's owed, brushing off the gratitude with a humble nod. Erdos proudly shows off Sigil, the magical war axe he snatched from an immortal witch, and he's itching to swing it as soon as the wait is over. Anshan clicks the pieces together. He realizes the axe is tied to Erdos's real brand of justice, and suddenly he knows why this one-of-a-kind weapon matters so much. Erdos drops the bombshell. Sigil can unleash true justice's magic twice a day, making Enchan burst with pure delight. The whole group bursts into laughter as Eridos finally gets it. Then Chan's face lights up with recognition when he clocks that Chan is the famous figure's grandchild, and the resemblance hits them instantly. Just as the group starts to move, a mysterious figure cuts in. Then the chief steps forward with an overwhelming presence that freezes everyone in stunned silence. Amada and Patty trek through the forest, staring in awe as tiny fairies whirl around them, and those delicate wings glitter like sparks while they spin through the air. A stern elder corners Patty and demands to know why she came back after getting banished. Patty swallows hard and insists she means no harm, but the air between them crackles with pure tension. Amada strides forward and there it is, Patty saved his life, so the elder leans in, hooked by the wild link between them. Amada lays out the truth of their bond and the elder can't help but marvel at the irony. Patty, once cursed, now risks everything to save others. The elder blasts the curse's deadly warnings, but Amada digs in his heels, clinging to his trust in Patty. Patty has a glowing mark on her body, a crest that screams with immense mana, a rare chosen one sign meant for only a select few. And with that gift, the elder shoots a warning straight into the room. That kind of mana almost always invites misfortune. If you don't rein it in, it goes berserk, smashing everything in its path. Amada realizes that to tame this kind of power, he has to relearn magic from the ground up, skills everyone else has let slip into oblivion. Whoever's controlling him has turned into terrifyingly powerful sorcerers, pulling off feats that seem impossible, but the cost is brutal and the challenges keep piling up. Even with all the mix-ups, that crest is a badge of honor, something to respect, not fear or dodge. Nesca steps in and offers to train Patty to master the raging mana she learned, all while challenging the old legends the elder clings to. The elder bows his head and pours out a heartfelt apology for everything Patty's had to endure, and he's convinced that once she learns to rein in her mana, she'll become a huge help to the fairies. On his knees, the elder pleads for forgiveness, apologizing over and over as the chief and her grandfather watch in shock. Patty, overwhelmed to the brink, blurts out at him to stop right now. Patty realizes getting banished was the best thing that ever happened, because it shoved her straight to Shiro and gave her the chance to save the whole village. The villagers, even the chief, rush up to Patty with shaking relief, thanking her from the heart and begging forgiveness for what they did before. Tears streaking down her face, Patty swears nobody screwed up, then tells them she's carrying zero grudges. Still kneeling, the elder begs Patty to climb back to the village and take the job as the chief of fairies. Patty hesitates, but Aina, her loyal close companion, won't let her wander off, clinging to her like she can't bear to lose her. Patty realizes that walking away from the hums will drag loneliness right back into her life, so she tells Shiro, "I came here for you, but somehow I ended up feeling like this is home." Shiro digs through his ancestors' stuff and rips open an old letter meant for someone called Karen, and he can't believe what he just uncovered. That letter looks like it was meant for an old friend of his great-great-grandfather, so yeah, it's probably the clue that finally leads straight to him. Patty's nerves are screaming, but she nudges him to open it, because she can feel this is about to matter a lot. That letter spills out a raw, heartfelt plea from someone who's been craving a reunion, no matter what brutal hardships life threw at them. Next, Patty's heart cracks open at the message, hit with painful memories, and she bursts into tears while reading the note. Shiro lifts a letter he dug up while rummaging through his ancestors' stuff, and it clues him in an old acquaintance once mentioned fairies' ridiculously long lifespan. Patty leans in, hears her name slip through the letter, and blurts out how many times she's been saying it to herself just while reading. Aaron steps up, introduces himself as the letter's sender, thanks Patty for meeting up, and ends it with a warm, heartfelt goodbye.